much. Appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah, whatever sizes work for you. So we've got sweatshirts and t-shirts and gaps and everything. So. Hello, how you doing? Good, good. Let's see if I can camera on here.
Did you get us?
No.
Oh,
Do you guys have any questions at all since stuff? Everybody will start arriving here soon. Are you guys going to be warm enough in here if we keep the temperature like this? This is good.
So, do you think that I could get your number or something just so I can send you pictures of these?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me get you my card.
It's best to go whole game with email. No.
This the cards.
Oh yeah, there they are.
Yeah, and then if we do need to talk, what I'll do, I'll probably send you a link to set up an appointment on there. Just because my schedule's kind of crazy sometimes, so. And then, yeah, absolutely, that would be fantastic. Yeah, that's
I just so I can send pictures just in
yeah,
context of living somewhere or
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. If when you take the picture, if you hold it in your hand, I'll get a good sense of how big it is. Like I said, with classes this size, it really, it needs to be a little bit larger. At least I'd say, something about this size when you hold it up that everybody in the room can see it on there. If you, make it like a prop or something like that. That's and it doesn't have to look like a real prop. It just has to have the twist in it on either side, so that you can see it folded up there. It'd be nice to be able to fold it up so that people can tell what's there.
when you said it was angle like this.
Yeah, that angle right there. So what I would do is, if I were to actually make these personally, I would probably paint the hub here white, so that when you turn it like this and you show it to the students, they can see the angle of the prop there. And again, it doesn't have to be like super.
I think principal would probably show me the prop black.
Yeah, and again, you don't, just having a black prop is fine. We can always paint it too, so it would work. So. Hello, how you doing?
Good.
Anybody who's here, do you guys have any questions at all on any stuff or anything? So I think we left off on chapter 3, number 4, page 4 on chapter 3. So pick up roughly up there. Can you guys hear me talking through that speaker there? Is there, check. Can you hear that? Hey, Vonda, how you doing? Off this stuff a little bit here. You guys can hear that?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it was back in 2010. Looking there. Okay. Sir, like you can have. That we had a friend. Yep. It's near Culver's.
Yeah.
Well, are you?
Right. You're gonna get blasted here. The speaker stuff.
It's fine.
Morning.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, if we could, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started here. should see. Can you check with your friend that's at home and just make sure that they can? I'm sorry, what's that? Oh, it's muted. Okay, all right. Let's see here. I think it's the part of the internet. Is it? Are they having trouble? Okay, thank you. Yeah. Um, there we go. They should be able to see it now. Yeah, they're good. Okay, good. This right here is it's actually called a stabilizer. And there's this right here is what's called an anti-servo tab. What this does is when you pull back on the yoke, this is what's adjusting your elevator. It actually makes it move back and forth. Again, I'll probably get into that a little bit more later on, but it's a different type of elevator. You typically see these in a lot of like hyper rolling aircraft. This just happens to be a higher highway aircraft. But again, this is almost like a flying surface. It's just there's just one tube that goes straight through this point right here to the other side, and it just swivels back and forth like this. Okay. And this is, I don't know why they have this as far as the structure of the aircraft. These are various navigational tools we use. Like this is a VOR indicator right here. And we'll get into in depth into VORs later on, so I'm not going to really dive into that much. So there's different types of landing gear. You've got aircraft that have floats. You've got aircraft again if you land on snow or ice or something like that. They have skis here. This right here is the typical type of aircraft. This is called a tricycle gear aircraft. This one right here, if you take off the skis and put wheels on it, this would be known as a conventional gear aircraft. It always throws people off because you'd think conventional is more modern. But back in the 20s and 30s, conventional gear was the tail gear. And you can see the little wheel back here. That's the tail gear there, as opposed to a nose gear, which is up here. Okay. Engine. So this is the power plant. I typically have 4, 6, 8-cylinder engines, and then there's tons of other different types of engines, but they're typically going to have these cylinders. They're normally, most of them are horizontally opposed, and they're air cooled. The vast majority of them are air cooled. You will find some that are liquid cooled, and then there's like I said, a bunch of other types of engines, but the vast majority of aviation aircraft. That one there, that one over there are air-cooled engines. This one's got a big radial engine on this. We're looking at a steering for the people at home, which is a biplane. And the one behind us is the 172 there. And again, it's got the horizontally opposed. And what happens is air flows through the cowling to cool off. That's what cools it. Our cars are cooled by what? Is our cars air cooled, or are they? Yeah, they're fluid. Yeah, we use antifreeze, right? So, but again, most aircraft engines are air cooled, and there's a number of reasons why. We get into that again a little bit when we talk about engine or power plants there. So we talk also here. There's monocoque and then semi-monocoque construction of aircraft. I don't think there's any questions on the FAA test that go through this at all, so I'm not going to really spend a lot of time on it. This is a type of construction, so the difference between the monocoque and the semi-monocoque is you've got the monocoque just has bulkheads, and it's got the the formers for the skin, and then you've got the skin that stretches across. This is we're looking at the empennage of the aircraft right here, and you can see the vertical stabilizer back here. And then this one just adds the stringers there. So let's see here. Okay, and this, so interesting enough, this is a SR-22, a Cirrus aircraft. They started in Baraboo. I don't know if you know this. They started in a garage up in the hills in Baraboo, and then they moved out to the Baraboo Dulles Airport. They're now the #1, the largest general aviation manufacturer in the world. And they're now based in Duluth, I think someplace out west, right? Dakota's one of the Dakotas.
In Minnesota.
Yeah, their headquarters are in Minnesota, but they also have a plant, I think, in one of the Dakotas. Yeah, and they employ a lot of people. But anyway, they started. I visited them several times when they were here. They had a small hangar, the one that we're in over there, and they had these huge forms. So this is a composite built aircraft, and how they do that is they put layers of fabric, and then they put this, I guess you'd call it like a doping compound or something like that, on the fabric, and it forms then to the actual form that they have the fabric laid in. And so that's how they make these things, and they're very strong and they're very fast. If you notice it, it's kind of hard to see here, but you won't see any rivet lines on this aircraft. Whereas in a traditional aircraft here, let's just switch to the LCD view. Yeah, so here's a view of a Cessna 172. And you see all these lines right here. Those are like this right here would be the rivet line for the main spar right here that goes through the wing. But then you've got all these rib lines right here. Those are all rivets. And each rivet is, it sticks up a little bit. And so because of that, it actually slows the aircraft down. Well, with composite aircraft, they don't have that because there's no rivet lines. It's all, composite material that they put together. It's kind of like paper mache. You could actually make an aircraft if you wanted to, not something you'd fly in, but you could actually make it out of paper mache. It uses the same types of concepts there with it. So that's the difference between those. And most of the modern aircraft now are using composites, but not all of them. There's a lot. Cessna still makes the aluminum skin aircraft and things like that. Some of the drawbacks with composite aircraft, you can have this cracking and things like that. Typically, you don't see that very often in aluminum aircraft. The skin can crack a little bit, but not like it would in composite aircraft. And they can actually create these little structures here. Think of a composite aircraft as kind of like a plastic aircraft, and like a hard plastic. And if you break it, it's going to create cracks. And then the more stress you put on that, the more those cracks are going to propagate throughout the wing or wherever it is, whatever surface. So that's one of the drawbacks with it. You just have to be aware of it. If you see something like that, it's fairly easy to fix, but it's something that you typically don't have to deal with aluminum aircraft. Here's some different types of aircraft that are composite. I think there's several aircraft now, the commercial aircraft that are built with what is it? The graph. What is it? I'm trying to say there. What's the graph? I just said it the other. It's not graphite. It's not graphene either. It's like a tape. Gosh, I don't know. In any case, it's a new type of construction, and it's very similar to composite construction, but the material is very strong. As a matter of fact, they've had a couple of incidences where these large airliners, I think of two of them that have crashed that were made with this new material, and everybody walked on it. It wasn't, the landing, obviously the one I think was it about a year ago, I think it was, there was a large aircraft that had crashed on landing. Not the one that was recent up in Canada. This was a while back, but everybody was fine, and it was just a miracle when you think about it. But again, it is a type of construction there. So again, these are all composite aircraft right there. Okay, inside the aircraft, again, this doesn't have a whole lot to do with structure, but it's in the chapter, so I want to cover this. This is what you're going to see. We're going to see plenty of images of this when we do our training. So this is what we call a steam gauge cockpit. And what a steam gauge cockpit is just basically dials. Dials and gauges. Whereas a glass cockpit, also known as a TAA, which stands for Technically Advanced Aircraft, that's going to have big displays on it. And again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, it's literally like flying a flight simulator because you have all the same, displays you'll have in the simulator. It looks identical to it. And what's nice about that is if you get into the clouds, which you shouldn't as a VFR pilot, but if you do, it's much easier to interpret the information on here. That said, you still, if you're transitioning from steam gauge aircraft like this right here to a technically advanced aircraft, you still need a lot of training. There are a lot of older pilots like me, for instance, I won't, I work with these, enough, so I'm comfortable with working with the displays, but there is a transition when you're going from a steam gauge aircraft to a advanced aircraft, or a technically advanced aircraft. Because they do represent the same things up here. You got, various things. Let me just see up here. Yeah, I think we get into this a little bit more, so I don't want to delve into it right now, but there's techniques that we use as far as teaching students how to transition to it. One of them is to use a flight simulator. They are very good at simulating the types of displays that you're going to see in an aircraft, particularly these TA aircraft. Right. And then we talk a little bit about performance instruments in we do the class here. So performance instruments are going to be like your airspeed indicator, your current coordinator, and again, we haven't gotten into these, but we'll talk about them a little bit more later on. This is your directional gyro, and you can tell it has something to do with direction because it's got 360 degrees, and it also has north, south, east, and west on it. So this is our altimeter, which tells us our altitude, and then you've got your vertical speed indicator, which just tells you how fast you're climbing or descending. Those are considered what we call performance instruments there. This is the steam gauge version of that. This would be the technically advanced version of it. And like here, airspeed indicator, you can see this is what we call the airspeed tape down here. It's the same thing as this, but it's just represented in a different way down here on the big displays there. Altimeter, again, altimeter for a steam gauge aircraft down here. This is the altimeter tape right here. And then vertical speed is right here. Vertical speed is indicated on this right here, this indicator right there. And then our directional gyro, which is right here in the steam gauge aircraft, is this display right here. So it basically follows the same type of display that you have up here, except that this is displayed on the screen instead of this being a gauge right here. And then the turn coordinator, you've got this little thing is like some little lines that come off from here. So again, we get into that later on, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. These are the control instruments. These just tell you, when you control the aircraft, these are the instruments you're going to be looking at. So if I want to add more power, I'm going to, increase my throttle. My RPM is going to increase right here. And I should be able to see that on the RPM gauge of the tachometer. And then you've got, let's see, your attitude indicator, which we always use. This common for both control and performance. We'll use that to see the pitch of the aircraft. Is it pitching up, down, banking? There, so all right. And then these are some other types of instruments you're going to find in an aircraft. VORs, again, we're going to get into this in great detail, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But these, this right here is an attitude indicator right here. The glide slope helps us identify where we are in relation to coming into land at an airport that has what's called an ILS or instrument landing system. But again, you don't have to worry about it right now. We're going to get into that. So, right. Let's jump into principles of flight. Okay, so there's some really key concepts here when it comes to principles of flight. One of them being is the atmosphere. You really have to have a good understanding of what atmosphere is and how it affects aviation, because it has dramatic effects on how well the aircraft performs. Whether we take off from a mountain airport or an airport like this, we're about roughly 1,000 feet above sea level here. All those factors, temperatures, things like that, humidity is going to affect how well the aircraft performs. So you can't just take your plane out and assume that it's always going to have the same performance at any airport, or any particular time or whatever. It's everything is based on, as far as aircraft performance, everything is based on what is happening in the atmosphere. And you can start doing this now if you just start, going onto websites and look at, weather charts. You can start getting yourself ready for some of the stuff we're going to talk about with weather. But again, weather, the atmosphere dictates how well our aircraft performs. And this is where we really get into it. So again, really critical concepts in order for you to understand what's happening here. So they've got a diagram here. This is, if you take a cross section of an aircraft right here, This is just a piece of aluminum right here, and you can see there, it's very thin. You can take a screwdriver and punch it through the aircraft aluminum on that aircraft out there, and indeed most aircraft, the aluminum is very thin. But it's what they want to draw to your attention to here is that if you really zoom into this, what you're going to find is there are like little lines in there. There's all these little imperfections in the aluminum itself, and even in the paint sometimes. All those things kind of contribute to create what's called parasitic drag, which we're going to cover later on. But just something to kind of store in your memory bag there. So let's talk about atmosphere. There's a lot of things that are really important to understand about this. So we don't think of it right now, but we're in a fluid, okay? And air is a fluid, right? Okay, the wind blows, it flows, right? Just like water flows. Okay, so you've got wind. There, we can actually measure a parcel of air. Like right now, I'm holding a parcel of air in my hand. Okay, can't see it because it's air, right? But if I were to take this, let's say I was up on the space station, and I could safely put my hand outside and put my hand out there, would there be any air? No, it's a vacuum, right? And that's a difference between down here, we've got all this air that, air has mass to it, and it gets, it actually is drawn toward the bottom or the surface of the earth, right? Because of gravity, because it does have mass. The further you travel up, the less air there is. So if I let's say at 30,000 feet, I put my hand out and grab a cup of air, it's going to fit in my hand, but it's not going to weigh nearly as much as the air that I have down here. Okay, I'm going to use a couple of different techniques to kind of describe this, so you understand this. If I have a balloon down here, okay, let's say I take a balloon, blow it up down here, and if there's obviously pressure acting on it down here, right? It's pushing on all sides of it. There's also pressure pushing onto the balloon. When I take that same balloon and I just hold it and say I raise up or climb up to 30,000 feet in my plane, what is going to happen to the balloon? Is it going to compress or is it going to expand? We know that pressure is, as we go higher, the pressure is less and less, right? Is that balloon going to compress or is it going to expand? It's going to expand, yeah. And why is that? There's less pressure pushing down on it. That is a key element. You must understand that to understand performance in an aircraft. So at 1,000 feet above sea level, which is what we are roughly here, the aircraft is going to perform differently than it would if it was at 30,000 feet, because there's a lot less pressure. The air is much less dense. Okay. Now, how do you measure that? In the aircraft, how do we measure it? How do we measure it? Yeah. So, how do we measure that? So, well, have you ever heard of a barometer? You guys know what a barometer is? Okay. So this right here essentially is a barometer. This is what we're looking at. And let's define all the different elements in here. So basically, this is a dish right here that we have, and you have some fluid in it. It could be anything. And then you have a tube that is open right here on the bottom. You've got fluid in here. This is the fluid right there. And it's open right here, and that sticks into the fluid. And then you've got this tube that's sealed at the top. Okay. So if I have this barometer in my hand, let's say, and I take this barometer and raise it to 30,000 feet, what's going to happen to the fluid that's in this right here? Is it going to go up the tube or is it going to go down? It's going to go down. Yeah. So, and that's because there's less pressure up there. So right here we measure atmospheric pressure in inches of mercury and then millibars. So here you've got your gauge there, and that is just when our pressure changes, this fluid is either going to go up or down. and it's going to reflect right here on this gauge right there. That's kind of what's happening in the aircraft as well. Although in the aircraft, you can't have a barometer like this because it would be spilling water all over the place. It wouldn't work. They use something different in the aircraft. And we won't dive into that now. I just need you to understand that atmospheric pressure is extremely important in calculating, performance of the aircraft for you to understand. Because if you're at a really high airport, let's say you're at 7,000-8,000 feet and you take off, well, the aircraft is not going to perform as well because the air is not as dense. Okay, there's not as much air for the wings to grip. So when the aircraft is flying along like this, there's fewer particles of air hitting that, so the aircraft actually produces less lift. And again, we'll get into that later on too. But so those are, it has a huge impact on it. I was out in Laramie, Wyoming a while back, and I couldn't believe how much runway it took to get off the ground. Their runways out there are really long. They're not like here we have 5,000-foot runways typically in the state of Wisconsin. Some are really small. We've got some 2,000, 1,500-foot runways for small aircraft. But the aircraft, the runways out there for the same type of aircraft are much longer, and that's because the elevation. If you look at Wyoming, you'll see that the elevation there is much higher. You're getting into 3,000-4,000 foot. Laramie, I think, is around 6,000 or 7,000 feet in altitude. So just that difference in altitude, 7,000 feet, really impacts the amount of performance of the aircraft, and also here the atmospheric pressure. So let's use Laramie as an example. So let's say the altitude, the sea level altitude of the level above sea level for Laramie is like 7,200 feet. I think that's what it is, but I'm not certain. If we look at this barometer, is it going to be higher or lower than what we're showing here, for instance? Yeah, it's going to be definitely a lot lower. Yeah, because there's not as much pressure on it. And again, that pressure creates density with the air. It also, well, I mean, the big thing there is there's just not as much pressure, forcing, in this case, the water down. So, all right. So here's a couple of illustrations here I wanted to show to you as well. So this is, 10 knots with fairly low pressure. Okay, we've got our hand just holding up like this. And you're not going to see this in the book anymore, by the way. These are just some illustrations that I want to put on there. So this is now 40 knots. And you have a much, so we went from 10 knots to 40 knots. And your dynamic pressure basically increases like 16 times, going from 10 knots to 40 knots. So pressure has a big impact on performance. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because eventually we're going to use the wings here to show you how you produce lift and things like that. So let's scroll down up here one more. All right, so in this one, fairly low density air. So this would be if we're at a high altitude, like 30,000 feet, let's say. We're traveling at 40 knots. And notice the difference between 40 knots with high pressure and 40 knots with fairly low density here. This would be like high density air right here. This would be low density air. So the air is still traveling at 40 knots between these two. But because the air is very low in density here, it doesn't move my hand back as much. You see this one right here, the hand is moved back a little bit more. That's because the air is much denser here. But if you move some of the air molecules out of there, the air is still hitting that hand, but it doesn't have the higher pressure that it would. So again, here we go. Here 40 knots, high air density, high dynamic pressure. Obviously, your hand's going to be moving back like that. And you could try this sometime if you ever get up in the mountains. We always do around here. You put your hand out the side of the window and you put your hand in the slipstream of the car or whatever. You can feel that pressure moving on it. If you go to the mountains, let's say around 6,000-7,000 feet, do the same thing. You're not going to feel as much pressure. It's gonna, it'll be easier to hold your hand outside of the window. Whereas on a really cold day, with relatively high pressure, if you hold your hand outside of the window, it's going to really push that back. Yep.
Another example of that. My mom was here in Wisconsin. We got some more severe headaches, but when we get to Montana, they're just more elevated.
Yeah, yeah, okay, that's a good example. I mean, we're machines, we work like that. And actually, you can say the same thing for aircraft engines. They get headaches too. Describe it differently in there, but yeah, that's a good example because the pressure here is much higher, obviously, than out west. Especially in the mountains, you're not going to have that much pressure, hitting you. We don't realize it, but we have about 14 pounds of pressure per square inch in our body right now. We don't worry about it because it's like this is something we've always lived with. But as you go higher or lower, like if you were to go scuba diving, down in the cave, someplace really deep, you're going to feel more pressure on your body. Okay. Again, as you go up higher, less pressure. And that's why mountaineers, they need oxygen when they go up to a certain altitude. They have to have oxygen because they can't breathe it in easily. Sometimes they have to have forced oxygen, which is like fighter pilots. They have to have air blown into their lungs instead of just having it out of the lungs. So we do talk a little bit about, I think, let me just see if I can put this up here. So again, atmospheric pressure, very important. All right, so we do talk a little bit about the standard atmosphere because, let me see if I've got that someplace. I don't know if they show that. Yeah, I'm sure they do here.
You show them.
Do they say standard atmosphere? Yeah, well,
Yeah,
really,
they have the graphs.
Yeah. So we'll use, they do have this graph in there? Okay,
Yeah.
good. All right, so if you look at this graph, this is something you're probably going to refer to quite a bit. We talk about standard atmosphere, and we need to understand what is the standard atmosphere. It's really simple as far as remembering the numbers, but standard atmosphere at sea level is 29.92 inches of mercury and 15 degrees Celsius or 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Those numbers you have to commit to memory. 29.92 inches of mercury and 15 degrees Celsius if you want to use whatever Celsius or Fahrenheit on there. If you go up to 1,000 feet, let's say we've got a barometer or an altimeter, what we would see is, if you max this, we would see like a barometer would read 28.86 inches of mercury at 1,000 feet. And again, this is using a standard atmosphere. We have to use a standard atmosphere because of performance calculations we use in our airplane manuals. So we have a flight manual that we use to determine how well our aircraft is going to perform. And we need to understand, first off, what the standard atmosphere is. And again, it's 29.92. This is at sea level, okay, 0 feet altitude, or zero feet right here. That's sea level, 29.92 and 15 degrees Celsius. But we need to know that because the atmosphere is constantly changing. Like right today, the outside barometer, let me just see if I can bring it up on the smartphone right here. I guess it's probably lower, unless we had a high pressure system with it, but I guess it's probably lower here. So that's the one thing about weather is, the atmosphere is constantly changing. And because of that, we need to know how our plane is going to perform in that atmosphere or in that particular parts of the air, whether it's around variable here or wherever we're flying out of. So okay, so it's 29.02, which is less than. So it's lower pressure. And again, oftentimes with poor weather, your barometer is going to read lower with lower pressure when you have bad weather. Bad weather is associated with low pressure, let's say. Okay. Whereas good weather, typically, if you see a high pressure system, then you're going to have better weather to deal with. So, Any questions on that at all? Again, some of these concepts are really tough to understand. If you can get this nailed down now, it's going to make it easier for you later on when you're doing the performance calculations in the air. All right, so let's take a look at this. So again, if I go up to 10,000 feet, we're now at 20 inches of mercury on our barometer right there. So what we're seeing here, just take a look at this. So we go from 29 at 0 feet, which is sea level, right? At 1,000 feet, we go to 28. At 2,000 feet, we go to 27. At 3,000, we go to 26 inches. And again, notice that this number is going down by about roughly an inch per 1,000 feet. Okay. And so we get down to 10,000 feet. It's almost an inch, but it's a good way for us to calculate, what our, if your altimeter reading is a certain reading, we can actually calculate what our the altitude that aircraft thinks it's at by using a simple formula. And that's basically, we just glance at this right here. These are basically 1,000 foot is, per inch there. Again, this will make more sense when we get into the performance of it, but I want to draw your attention to that because again, that's part of, the performance of the aircraft. And we do spend quite a bit of time on it, on aircraft performance, because it is a critical part of getting your pilot's license. Okay, does everybody remember when we talked about Bernoulli's principle? Does anybody know what Bernoulli's principle is? Yep.
The high and low pressure.
Okay, expand on that. So so you've got, high pressure, low pressure, but what is the actual law? Does anybody remember what the actual law is? Yes, that's almost exactly right. So the faster a fluid moves, the lower the pressure. Okay, the faster a fluid moves, the lower the pressure. That's basically a synopsis of it. They use different terms for it, but essentially that's what we're looking for again. And here we've got fluid moving in here, all this fluid, it winds up flowing faster through here. This is called a venturi right here. And as the air hits this venturi right here, it moves faster as it goes through there. And typically this is the side right here where we're going to see the lower pressure. Right here, this is moving fast right in this area right here. Again, venturi. Now take a look at this. So let me just draw let me see if I can do that. All right, so let me just draw a line right here. Oops. Draw that. Okay. There we are. Okay, so we've got a line there. And let me just outline this right here. What does that look like to you? Yeah, it looks like a cross section of a wing, right? Okay. So in a venturi, this area right here, this is where the low pressure is. And actually maybe even extends in that area right there. But we've got kind of the camber, remember the camber of the wing right there, that curved surface at the top. So what Bernoulli is doing here, is describing here, is that you're creating low pressure here in this particular venturi. This is just a pipe with this squeeze on one area there. We actually use this, in our aircraft. We have carburetors. This is how a carburetor works. But I just want to illustrate this right here. This is creating an area of low pressure, and that's what causes the wing to get kind of sucked up, right? So if I'm flying really fast, I've got a good camber on the wing as we're moving like that. There's low pressure up here. It's kind of sucking that wing up like a vacuum cleaner, right? And again, that's because of the low pressure. High pressure, like you said here, is on the bottom portion of the wing, right? Relative to the pressure up here. This is the low pressure. This is the high pressure. So we're pushing that wing up. Okay. Right, that's what's happening here in the venturi. So air pressure decreases in the venturi tube, again, just like it does with a wing there. Okay. All right, so yeah, we did talk about camber, right? We go over that, I think. Well, back, I think it was the last lesson that we talked about. So let's just review this just to make sure that everybody understands this. These are, again, are even again more very critical concepts for you to understand. You want to put this in your memory bank. So the chord line of a wing, this is a cross section of a wing right here. And we've got what's called a camber surface on the top right here. And camber is nothing more, just means curved surface. So you've got a curved surface on the top, stretching all the way back, and you've got a curved surface. In this case, it's not as curved as the top here. This has got a stronger camber to it, is what we'd say. And then if you were to draw the average, put a dot between the average distance between the upper camber and the lower camber, you get this line right here. This is called the mean camber line, or the average camber line there. The one that you really need to know, this is the most important thing you're going to learn when it comes to the flight of, how to understand how aircraft works, and that is the chord line. Very important. So the chord line is from the trailing edge, straight line to the very tip or the leading edge. That's the chord line. I'm going to be saying that term a lot, and you need to understand it without even thinking about it. We're going to be talking about angle attack. I use chord line all the time. So again, that's a very important term. Again, put it in your memory banks. As far as leading edge and trailing edge, I'll use those terms a lot. But again, the chord line is probably the most important thing for you to get out of this diagram right here. I think camber is nice to have, but the other two are the trailing edge and leading edge. So this trailing edge could be any. I mean, it's the furthest edge back of the wing. It's not, measured from some point. It's like the tip of the wing, or it's not measured here. It's not measured here. It's actually the furthest point back of the wing. So here I've got the flaps on this aircraft. So the chord line would extend from the leading edge of this wing right here to the tip, the trailing edge of the wing right there. Okay, that's the chord line of the aircraft. It's the very furthest back and furthest down portion of it. Again, very important, because to understand what's happening with the flight physics, we use those terms a lot. Again, the chord line is the most important. Okay. This right here just shows you an airfoil and the airflow around it. It's just, if it's just static, it's just moving, air is flowing through it. This is the extreme example where you've got super high camber surfaces on the upper and lower portion of it. And you can see here, as air hits this, it tries to follow the shape of the ball there. If you look at this one right here, this is nice smooth flow. There's no turbulence at all. When you put it, do exaggerated cambers here, which is what they're showing here, what happens is as the air flows across that surface, it's trying to stick to it, but it can't. So it breaks off and it creates these what we call eddies. In this case, they call it turbulent flow, but it's creating lots of turbulence there. And that's not good for aircraft if you want to be flying really fast. If you want to, if you have a jet fighter, you don't want this, especially if you're coming. Now, if you're coming in for a landing, that's different. Then it's okay to have that. But when we're actually flying at cruise altitude, we really want to minimize this portion of it. That's why wings are not round. They're not cylinders. And there is one exception to that. If you ever want to talk about it, I'd be happy to share it with you. It's not relevant here. So, all right. So with this wing right here, again, is facing right into what we call relative wind. You're going to hear me say that a lot too. That's the direction of where the wind is coming from. Essentially, or I shouldn't say the wind, where it's actually opposite of the flight path of the aircraft. That's the relative wind. And again, we'll get into that more later on, but I'm going to introduce these terms for you as we go through it. I want to explain them a little bit. In any case here, so this one right here is facing right into the breeze there. If we had this in a wind tunnel, it would be facing straight down the wind tunnel here. This one, however, is at an angle. Okay, this is showing several things. I love this diagram because there's a lot of stuff happening here. So you've got air flowing over this wing right here, and you've got it hitting this camber of this wing, and it's flowing down. So there's several things happening here. We're seeing Newton at work, and we're also seeing Bernoulli at work. We're also seeing some of the the effects of what happens if you have too high of a what's called an angle of attack, which we haven't gotten into. Yes.
And that'll also be diagram of collapse.
You could use this as a flat diagram, yeah, as well, because it basically is going to do the same thing, very similar things on there. So let's talk a little bit about all the different forces or things that are going on in this simple diagram. So again, we've got the airflow flowing over the top. It's going through here. Where is our area of low pressure? Is it down here? Is it up here? Is it back here? Where's our low pressure?
Back, top.
Right here?
Yeah.
Or right here?
Yeah.
Right there? Okay, yeah. Okay, that's Bernoulli at work. Okay, why is that the case? So why is this moving faster over this than down here? And that's because if you look at this, there's a camera here. And if you had a couple molecules, let's say right here, and one took the highway and one took the low path right here, they would pretty much follow each other, but they're not necessarily going to end up at the same point here. But because there's a further distance for air to travel on this side, the air that's up here, the particles, they have to travel faster across that surface. Otherwise, they're just going to bunch up right here. It won't work. So the way it works here is you've got, again, one molecule on the top, one molecule on the bottom. You can see that this path of this molecule that the cursor's at right there has a much shorter path than, let's say, this molecule up here. This one's got a much longer path to go through. And so what happens is that molecule travels faster to kind of catch up with these molecules. And essentially, that's what creates the Bernoulli principle. That's, you've got now lower pressure on this top side. But what else is happening on this right here? Is there another type of physics concept we can apply to it? Anybody? Your answer is apply. I'm going to give somebody else a chance. Anybody else? So we talked a little bit about Bernoulli. Who else is that? Sat under the apple tree. What's that? Isaac Newton. Yeah. What did he say? There are 3 laws that he came up with that are really we use in everyday physics. So his third law. Does anybody know it? Yes. So that actually is So that's basically it. So essentially, in a nutshell, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Okay, and you basically said it right there. Yep. So, and what's happening here? Just imagine this is a air particle or a BB or something like that. So what's going to happen is this little BB or air particle goes through here. It hits this surface and it goes down. That's Newton at work right there. They don't. This is really to illustrate more Bernoulli right here, but. With this right here, when those air particles hit this, just think of them as BBs. They're hitting this and they're going down. So that does 2 things. It creates downwash, but every one of those particles that hits that wing is exerting a force on the underside of the wing. It's actually pushing that up. Just like when we stick our hand out the car window and go like this, we feel a lot of air hitting it. It's pushing our hand back. It's pushing it up. But it's also pushing it back. That's what's happening with Newton there. Bernoulli on the top, that's where he's busy at work, and Newton is on the bottom of the link there. Does that make sense? Okay.
So there's 2 forces. There's a force, a high pressure zone pushing the wing up, and a low pressure zone pulling it.
Yeah, that's Bernoulli. Okay. So, but there is, with Newton, you also have the effect of all that air hitting the bottom portion of the wing, and because of that, further action. Yeah, exactly. So that's a good thing if we want to generate lift and get the aircraft up in the air, right? But it's also, if the wing is like this, let's say our wing is at an angle like this, we're flying along like this, that means that some of that force is actually, slowing the aircraft down. That's what we call induced drag. And we get into that in greater detail later on. But induced drag plays a big part of aviation. And that's when that angle of the wing goes like this. Yeah, it causes your hand to go up, but it also causes your hand to move back. So again, if you want to try this when you drive home, just stick your hand out the window. You're going to feel, if you just kind of let your hand go a little bit, you're going to feel, it doesn't take much of an angle too. If you're traveling at like 40 miles an hour, you hold it like this, just a little bit of an angle, you'll feel your hand kind of rise, right? But you're also going to feel your hand try to get pushed back. And if I put my hand like this, it's going to go way back, right? You're going to feel all that force on it. So that's what's happening here in this diagram. The other thing here I want to point out is, again, this diagram is awesome. You've got this air particle that is traveling along the surface of the top portion of the wing, and it wants to stick to it. You know, when it's like a fluid, it's like, you know, water. It wants to stick to it, but at some point, it just can't. There's too much low pressure back here, and it actually peels off, and it creates these eddies or this turbulent flow here. This is what you're going to see at a higher angle of attack. Again, we haven't gotten into that. We're going to talk about it later on. So something to think about there. Okay, good. Any questions on that? All good. All right. Here we talk a little bit about lift. Again, you can see Bernoulli at work here. That air particle flowing the top's got much longer distance to go. So again, it's going to generate a lower pressure up here and relatively high pressure here. But lift always acts, you know, basically perpendicular to the wing, right? And you've got some drag. This is what I was just explaining there. When you hold your hand up like this, again, you're going to have drag, and it's going to pull your hand back, but it's also going to lift it up. So that's what this diagram is showing you right here. Okay. Again, there's our leading edge. I've got your trailing edge right here. Again, we can draw our line right here if we want to. So this is our chord line right there, from the trailing edge to the leading edge there. And then let's do this, just so you can see them. This is giving you a hint of what we're going to be dealing with in the future here. This right here, by the way, is called angle attack. We're going to get into that. So there is, and here they talk about a stagnation point. This isn't really critical for your understanding of it, but basically the air as it hits here kind of bunches up right here, and most of the air is either going to go above the wing or below the wing. And again, we just talked about this area of increased pressure. Again, this is Bernoulli at work. An area of reduced pressure right, this area right here. And that's what causes the aircraft to create lift, or the wings to create lift there. And here, some diagrams here that just show a plate, a metal plate in wind here. I've got a plate like this here. We've got the plate that's at a bit of an angle. Again, we would consider this our angle of attack right there. The wind is, we call it the relative wind, is in this direction right here. And you can see it, that's this line right here, basically all these lines up here. That's considered the relative wind. That's the direction the air is coming from. And it hits this plate on the bottom. Again, we see a lot of Newton, and on the top, we're probably seeing more Newton here than we are Bernoulli. Although the air still does, the air particles are traveling a little bit further on the top side, we're not seeing as much. And, you know, to get more lift out of the wing, what we do is we create a camber. So I'd actually create a wing that has a bit of a camber. Now we're going to get a lot more, you know, Bernoulli, essentially low pressure on the top, because that, yes. You could, yeah, if it was designed right, you could have a totally flat wing. As a matter of fact, if you look at a lot of fighter jets, if you look at it, they have, most of them have very symmetrical airfoils. They have very thin wings, compared to like an aircraft in like a Cessna or the Stearman right here. So a fighter jet may have a wing that is more along the lines like this. So it has kind of an even camber on the top and the bottom. It's called a symmetric airfoil. We just want to talk about that. Yep.
This is on the it's F-15. The air intakes on both sides, those don't go with the cockpit of the plane. Those go down so the airflow flow in.
Yes, yeah, they actually angle it down. So that's a good point. So it's yeah, that has to do with the angle that the aircraft is flying at, or the angle of attack that's flying at, probably at cruise speed. Is that adjustable? Do you know
Yeah, it variables.
Well, actually, your dad actually. What's that? Sorry. What's that? It's yeah. The intakes. You said the intakes.
Yeah.
Okay.
The different so like F-14, they didn't pitch up and down,
Mhm.
and that would cause compressor stalls in the
Oh,
engines.
and then the
And
F-15, they
F-
actually feel like a call
F-15.
that opens up a little bit to.
Yeah, so the air intakes, so
Mhm.
if you have a high airway, the
Yeah.
the intakes will pitch down
Okay,
with the flow of air.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not big, but
Okay. All right. Well, interesting. You know, that's something that I can get into for you. I start flying fighter jets. That would be nice. But yeah, that's that. There are a lot of ways of dealing with some of those issues that you know that pilots face with flying certain types of aircraft. So that's one of them. You know, having an adjustable column. You'll see that with a lot of aircraft. All right. Let's see. This is an example of demonstrating that turbulent flow. Again, the air particle is hitting the top of that, and it wants to stick to it. But at some point, it just there's too much pressure there, and it just gets ripped off from it, and it creates this turbulent flow. The reason I'm showing you these is because you can't see it when we're actually flying. You can't actually see this. There's some really cool things, videos online where they tape little pieces of yarn on a wing, and you can actually kind of helps you visualize what is happening to the wing and going into stall or going into a high angle attack as opposed to a low angle attack. So you can imagine an aircraft with a wing, let's say, flying straight into the wind. Let's say I put a little piece of tape here with a yarn on it. It's just going to have a straight line on it. Just be a straight line. And here, however, if I had a piece of tape here on the wing and a chunk of yarn on it, the yarn would be flopping around like this. That's what that turbulent airflow does. And it produces lots of drag on the aircraft, and we do need it to when we come in for landing, we want that drag to slow us down. But typically in cruise flight, that's something we want to avoid. Okay. Go through. We talked a little bit about thrust and drag, right? Those are the two opposite opposing forces on aircraft. So you've got, lift and weight. Here, yeah, right here. You got lift, right, acting up like this. You've got weight of the aircraft acting down. You've got thrust that's working this way, right here. It's propelling the aircraft forward. And then you've got drag moving back. So what they're showing here is just two components of that, lift and drag here on the aircraft. And again, we can see this is just a plate right here. This is with a cambered airfoil right here. And you can see that it's this molecule right here has to travel a lot further over the top of this wing compared to this molecule right here that's just flying over a flat plate. And also look at this, because of the camber right here, there is less turbulence. See, there's only a little bit of turbulence here. On this one, on the plate, there's a lot more turbulence with it because again, there's no camber. It's just an abrupt change of direction for the air particles. Here, the air flows smoothly over the top, and it tries to stick to that top of that surface. And back here, you get a little bit of turbulence, which is again unavoidable. Whenever you're producing lift, you're always going to have some turbulence there in the wing. All right. Mean camber line, again, we already talked about that, just the average distance between the top portion of the wing and the bottom portion of the wing. If you have a perfectly symmetrical airfoil, does anybody know what this shape of this line would be? Yeah, perfectly symmetrical.
Straight.
It would be totally straight, yeah. You could also have a camber on the bottom. So this is a type of wing. We don't see these very often, but there are some aircraft that do have this. This was really common back in the early days of developing aircraft. They were experimenting with all kinds of stuff. So again, mean camber is right there. But the actual chord line, this is interesting. So that chord line is going to be from, just draw that out so you can see it. So if I click on this right here. Yeah, there is. Yeah, there is. Yeah, let me just do that here to make it easier for you. Let's see here. So there's our chord line, right? The leading edge to the trailing edge, which doesn't look anything like the wing there. This one, if I were to do this over here, let's switch over to this one here. So this one, again, if I want to draw the chord line on it, I'm just going to click on the leading edge here. Oh, there we go. Click on the leading edge here, and there we go. That's our chord line right there on this cross section. Okay, this is just another diagram of the chord line. Again, if you can keep that in your mind, chord line is always measured from the very tip of the leading edge of the aircraft or the wing to the trailing edge. And again, the farthest edge of the wing, the trailing edge, then you'll have your chord line. And that's what we're going to use to calculate our angle of attack, or visualize our angle of attack. So we've already gone through this. I think you guys understand this. This is like, again, Bernoulli's law at work. You've got low static pressure here, relatively high pressure compared to the pressure down here. And so, and again, here are some of the aerodynamic forces. You do have lift. And again, like I said before, if the airplane is flying in this path right here, we've got a relatively high angle of attack right here. So our flight path is like this. This is our relative wind, and our aircraft is flying like this. We have a certain amount of drag from this wing. Again, if we do the same, if we took our hand, stuck it outside the window, put it in the slipstream, and it's going to push us back. That's what we're feeling there is drag. Okay. No questions at all. Everybody's got this. All right. Let's go down a little further here. Let's see. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit more about center pressure or the center lift later on. We get into weight balance here. Again, these are all diagrams that just help you understand the lift and how lift and drag work. So here now we start getting into talking about angle of attack. So we need a couple things to determine what our angle of attack is, right? So this is a trick question. What is the angle of attack of this aircraft? Okay, you say 0. Anybody want to give us a guess? Yeah. Boom, you got it. Okay, so you cannot determine the angle of attack unless you know the flight path of the aircraft, which is opposite and equal to the is parallel to the relative width. Okay, so the flight path is on this aircraft is like this. So what is our angle of attack going to be?
Negative.
Yeah, it's going to be 90 degrees, right? Yeah, because the flight path is like this. The thing that you need to understand, and this the FAA will exploit this when you're taking the test. They're going to throw questions at you. They're going to say, well, what is the the attitude of this aircraft? What's the angle of attack? You need to understand this concept. What is angle of attack? And you need to know that. Let me just get a pencil here so I can show this. So you need to, first off, you need to know the flight path I use normally, but you can use relative wind too to determine your angle of attack. So in this case, the plane is flying like this, okay? And so that means our angle of attack is right here, okay? You can see the wing there. We know what the chord line is, right? Remember what the chord line is? It's the leading edge to the trailing edge. So this would be the chord line right here. And then this right here represents our flight path. So that's our angle of attack right there, okay? Now, if this plane was dropping like this is our flight path, right? It's going like this. The plane is actually dropping down like this. So again, if our chord line doesn't change, right? It's always from the leading edge to the trailing edge. So it's like this. So this is our angle of attack. It's going to be minus 90 degrees, like I said, okay? And if it's going like this, if it's rising like this, so again, our flight path is again pointed up like this. These are extreme examples, obviously. Unless you're doing aerobatics, you're not going to be doing this. So there's your angle of attack. There's your positive 90 degrees from here to here. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Again, super critical that you understand that because there are a lot of questions that talk about angle of attack. So there is what's called a critical angle of attack. And I don't know if maybe I won't get into that right now. We actually delve into it a little bit more when we talk about stalls. But just know that the angle of attack, you need two things. You need to know, first off, the chord line, okay, of the wing itself, and then you need to know the flight path of the aircraft. You'll see me demonstrate this on the videos. When I use the simulator on here, I'll turn on the flight path, and then you can actually see what I'm talking about with it. So, okay, perfect. All right, so this is in the book. I think they may show this. Oh, no, this is a book, so you won't see this on there. They may have a diagram similar to this in the book, but so there's our four forces. We've got thrust, we've got drag, we've got lift, and then we've got the weight of the aircraft, all right? So here now we can see we're talking about the relative path or flight path right there. And again, the relative wind always acts opposite and parallel to the flight path. So if you know what the flight path is, you know what the relative wind is, and vice versa. Generally speaking, when you go out and fly the plane, you're not going to be thinking about this stuff. You're not going to be thinking these terms and things like that. We just use this to help you understand how a plane flies, and also to help you fly the plane safely. Because there are some situations where if you get into like a stall situation, it's because you don't understand these concepts, or again, you accidentally get into a stall. And again, this kind of stuff does happen to regular pilots that fly a lot. They sometimes will not make the whole correlation between all these different forces, and they wind up getting into serious trouble as a pilot. So it's imperative that you understand it, so that when you work through all these problems, that it'll just be easier for you to work through all that stuff there. So all right, let's go here. Again, this is a couple of diagrams here with angle of attack. Again, chord line, just what we said there. There's our relative wind there, going this direction right there. Again, they talk about the chord line. Now here's, I'm talking this is a discussion on the flaps, using the flaps. And notice that the chord line is always drawn to again, very furthest back portion of the wing. In this case, it's that flap, and the flaps are down. So our chord line normally would be this up here, but because the flaps are down, our chord line is increased quite a bit right there. And there's reasons for that. And when we come in for landing, we definitely want to generate more drag. We want to slow down the aircraft a little bit more, and those flaps do that. So again, we'll talk about it a little bit more later on too. So, but again, it's important you understand that. Okay. So this is varying flight path here. So here's an aircraft basically just swooping down and then pulling back up. So here we've got a relatively lower angle of attack right here. Here it's medium, and then when you go into a climb right here. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. This is demonstrating the angle of attack is the same for all these right here. So even though the pitch of the aircraft is different. So angle of attack is not pitch of the plane. That's what they're showing here. Sorry about that. So in this case, if an aircraft is coming down, let's just show this right here. So let's say our flight path is down like this. All right. The aircraft can level off and still have that same angle of attack. That's what they're showing in this diagram right here. And then if they wants to go into a climb, add a little bit of power and go to a climb. But the angle of attack is consistent. In this case, that's what they're demonstrating here. The angle of attack does not equate to pitch of the aircraft. They're two very different things. Okay, and that's again something that the FAA they're going to ask you questions about pitch and angle of attack, and it is kind of confusing sometimes going through there and trying to understand the differences between the two. But again, if you just remember in your mind, the angle of attack is always flight path and chord line, whereas pitch of the aircraft is based on the nose. So if this is the aircraft right here, there's the aircraft, and we'd say that the aircraft is pitched up here. But it may be, our flight path may be like this, so our angle of attack is totally different than our pitch. Or it may be doing a tail slide. So again, it can be something totally different. Everything kind of hinges around that relative wind of the flight path of the aircraft. The pitch in this case is like this, okay? And that's the pitch right there. that basically is just a fixed point out in front of the nose of the aircraft. That's what our pitch is. We pitch up, pitch down, and we can pitch up and down, upside down as well, right? Just inverted, yeah, same thing. Mhm. Right. All right, so this one actually shows the changing angle of attack. So in this one, the aircraft is descending. It's got a high angle of attack, so it's generating lots of drag right here. This is the typical configuration when you're coming in to land the aircraft. You're going to have a higher angle of attack as you come in to land, and it's going to keep increasing until you actually land with the wheels on the runway there. And here we're starting to speed up again. Our angle of attack is decreasing a little bit. And then let's see, here we're in a climb, moving really fast here, and it's a very small angle of attack. So again, the pitch is all the same here. If you look at this aircraft, it has the same pitch attitude, but the angle of attack is different. So again, those are two different things, and it's easy to get those two confused, pitch versus angle of attack. Two totally different things. And when you take the test, the FAA written test, you need to make sure you sort those out to make sure that you don't answer a question incorrectly because of that. So, all right. Angle of incidence basically is just when an aircraft sits on the ground, the wings on some aircraft normally have a little bit of angle to them when they sit on the ground. If you look at that Cessna back there, I'm sorry for people at home, but the Cessna back there, you can see the wings are slightly bent back like this. Not much, but it's a little bit. That's called the angle of incidence there. And that's if you draw the longitudinal line from the tip of the nose there to the tail there, that's our longitudinal axis there. And then if you draw the chord line, the wing there, and extend it all the way back, that's your angle of incidence there. Okay. All right, and now we start getting into charts and everything. So some of this stuff is a little bit more complicated than others. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. But there's again a lot of stuff that's going on here. So what are we looking at here? So this right here, that C lower K or lower L, that stands for coefficient of lift. That's the amount of lift that the wing is producing at any given time, right? Again, that's a C and a lower L, which is very similar to CL. CL is just the C, capital C and a capital L together. That's the center of lift. But this, whenever you see a symbol like this, that's talking about the coefficient of lift. And again, that's just essentially what is the amount of lift that the wing is producing for a given angle of attack. So let's take a look at this. So obviously, the higher this number is, the more lift it's producing, right? The more lift the aircraft is producing. So if we look down here, looking at our angle of attack, at zero angle of attack, the plane would probably be moving really fast. All right, we're producing, well, let's see here. Yeah, so we're not producing as much lift, like coefficient of lift right there at zero angle of attack, and that makes sense. If I'm moving really fast through the air, Bernoulli is really doing a lot of work, right? Creating lots of lift. If I'm moving really slow, it's not going to be producing as much lift here. And at 0 degrees, you're basically flying directly into that relative, or you're staying right here. So, yeah, you'd have to maintain a high speed, let's say, to generate the sufficient lift to keep the aircraft at that altitude. Let's see what they're showing right here. And then as your coefficient of lift, as your angle of attack goes up, your coefficient of lift increases right here. That's really what this chart is showing here. So you can see at 8 degrees angle of attack, it may be like this right here, as opposed to 0. Let's just say we're flying at a constant airspeed. Let's say it's 100 knots, and at right here, we're not producing as much lift, right? At 0 degrees of angle of attack. Whereas as we start increasing our angle of attack, the wing is now rotating, or actually angle of attack is increasing. You're going to be increasing the amount of lift that the wing is producing. Okay. So we get up to a certain point, And eventually you get to your critical angle of attack. That's what this is right here. Now let's talk about critical angle of attack. That's another term you're going to hear me use a lot, critical angle of attack. And again, it's super important that you understand that as well. So what the critical angle of attack is, have you ever seen like a leaf fall off a tree and it just kind of floats down? You know, okay. So that's kind of what happens when the wing reaches its critical angle of attack. So right now we're flying, let's say our flight path is this direction right here. And the wing is just pointing right into it. We've got nice smooth airflow across the wing right here. Okay. When we start increasing our angle of attack, so again, our flight path is still in this direction. As we start increasing our airspeed, or increasing our angle of attack, what is going to happen again is we get some of that burbling or the turbulence that's flowing off the wing there, and it slowly creeps up the wing until eventually it gets to this point, and because of that, now there is insufficient lift to keep the plane at that altitude. That's a stall. Okay, and that's the critical angle. Every aircraft has a critical angle of attack. It's it happens at the same amount of degrees for that particular aircraft. Like most aircraft, it's going to be roughly around 16, maybe 17 degrees of angle of attack. And again, angle of attack is based on, how do we measure angle of attack is based on what?
I was
The two,
asking a question.
oh, you're asking a question. So how do we measure angle of attack?
The port.
What's that? Flight path and port landing, exactly. Okay, that's again super important thing to keep in your memory. So again, we know what our angle of attack is when it reaches that 16 degrees for whatever every aircraft is a little different. Like that one may stall, that Cessna over there may stall at having critical angle of attack at 16.2 degrees, and maybe this one is more like 18 degrees or something like that. It really depends on the shape of the wing and how the aircraft is configured, the structure of it. It doesn't have anything to do with the engine. That's a common mistake that people use. Look at airplane engine stall or engine quits. The wing does not stall. When you say stall in an aircraft, it refers to the wing producing insufficient lift to keep the aircraft up in the air, and so it descends. That's what a stall is. It just stops producing lift. It's probably still has some lift that it's producing, but it doesn't produce enough lift to keep it at your altitude. That's what is a stall. But again, that critical angle of attack, when you hit it, this wing is going to start creating all those little eddies, and again, it's not going to produce enough low pressure up here to keep that wing flying. So because of that turbulence there, now you're losing all of that benefit of height, having the camber going there, and and then the turbulence again is just that's what creates that stall, the critical angle of attack. Again, I'll show you this maybe with a simulator too. It makes a little bit more sense. And I know there's some really good videos out there on the learning site. I think they actually taped a bunch of yarn on a wing, and you can actually see when the aircraft goes into a stall. What happens is along the edge of the wing, all these little pieces of yarn are just flapped around. That is showing you turbulent airflow is what's happening there. Okay. All right. Let's go down to the next one here. Yeah, we've already talked about this. There's your symmetrical airfoil there. And this, again, you're going to see this in more like fighter aircraft, really fast aircraft. Yes.
If you have a greater thrust to weight ratio, does that mean you could have a higher critical angle?
No. No. The angle of attack has nothing to do with thrust, and that's one of those things that, again, it's a good question because I see that all the time even with real pilots. The understanding how that angle of attack works is again, it has nothing to do with thrust. It's just what you're focusing on is the shape of the wing, and if you're, let's say, it's just gliding down, it wouldn't make a difference. Whether you have a 5,000 pound turbine engine on the front, or just a Cessna 150, let's say, with a 100 horsepower engine on the front, it wouldn't make any difference. What it has to do with is with that airflow over the wing. That's what angle of attack has to do with that chord line.
Another thing on that is just the thrust to weight ratio. The thrust is very usually the weight is not bulk, the thrust can hold the plane up.
Correct. Yep, that's right. That's right.
That's what I meant.
Yeah. So that but the angle of attack for that aircraft is, again, you can take the engine off that aircraft and put in a bunch of weights, and the critical angle of attack is going to be the same for that aircraft as it would with an engine in it. Does that make sense? So again, I don't want there to be any confusion between it. Just because the aircraft has a jet engine on it and it can just stay there like this, it does not mean that you can, alter your angle of attack with that engine. It has to do with the airflow over the wings. Okay. Any questions on that? And again, you guys later on, we talk about this. We'll get into some of this stuff in a little more detail too. But this stuff right here is, again, really critical that you understand that. So, all right. Yeah, here's an example, a series of images here where where you're going into a stall here. So again, this is smooth airflow. It just flows across the wing there. Again, the slightly increased angle of attack. And notice that this vector right here is starting to point further back. That would be part of our lift vector, but part of it is turning into drag. Now that it's not pointing forward, they're not pointing straight up. It's actually pointing at a little bit of an angle backwards. Increased angle of attack, and again, our lift vector is now starting, for the wing anyway, is starting to point further back, which is increasing the amount of drag. Now we're starting to see the turbulent airflow right here. Now we've got just massive turbulent airflow. This airflow right here has reached its critical angle of attack right here, whether it's 16 degrees or whatever. And it stays the same for every for that model of aircraft. You're going to have 16, 17, 18 degrees for the critical angle of attack, and that's, it'll always be there. It's never going to change unless you modify the structure of the aircraft.
Should the critical angle of attack vary between the speed of the aircraft? So, no?
Yeah, no, the critical angle of attack it uses two things to so you've got your relative wind, right? And that's obviously, you can't control the relative wind unless you change the pitch of the aircraft and, dive down. That's changing the relative wind. Well, actually, no, you're not. The relative wind is always, acting, let's talk about that further. There's a better way to describe that, what you're saying there. So, yeah, thrust, again, there's nothing else that you have to know other than that angle of attack it's the critical angle of attack is always going to occur at the same angle every single time, regardless of how much thrust you have or what you do to roll the aircraft. If you move everybody in the back of the airplane, it's not going to change that angle of attack. It's still going to be the same there. What changes it is how you build the aircraft. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at this chart here real quickly. Again, aircraft airflow, nice and smooth over this wing. We're flying directly into the wind here. Basically zero angle attack here. This one again, we've got the design of the wing, the cross section has much greater camber. See how this one has a longer camber, this one has a real short, more curved camber. And so this aircraft right here might be analogous to like a really slow aircraft that's designed to get into like short fields. Is designed to fly slow. So you get a lot more turbulence behind it. Whereas this might be something closer to what we see in the Cessna here or something like that. Then totally round one, you've got just nothing but turbulence. And this again would be a practical aircraft. And then obviously this right here, you're not going to be able to fly with that. Lots of turbulence right here. And we can see it here in the drag. So a nice smooth design right here, nice long cross section there, very little drag. Now we're starting to see with the high camber wing cross section there, you get more drag and then fall. Or with the circle there, more drag than obviously the plate, just almost infinite drag there. These are the different types of airfoils that you'll see again, early airfoil. These were used later, probably in the 30s. This is something that we see a lot now. The Cessnas, a lot of Pipers have this type of design right here. Laminar flow, we do see this a lot in smaller planes. My Comanche has this type of airfoil. Again, it's more symmetrical than it is cambered like this one does. And then this right here, again, more of a symmetrical airfoil, and then a double wedge, which again you're not going to see anymore. Again, here's a good example of some different types of angles of attacks here. So, right, so here we've got a negative angle of attack, or basically we're pointing that nose down. That doesn't necessarily mean that the plane is descending, just because the angle of attack is like that. Again, don't get the angle of attack confused with pitch. Two totally different things. The plane could be flying like this. Okay, again, it all depends on what our flight path is. So that's this top one right here that we're looking at. Okay, and here they're showing us where the center of pressure. The center of pressure, also known as the center of lift, does move on the wing based on the angle of attack. So if you see this right here, that's if we have a negative angle of attack here, the center of pressure is going to be further back or further after the wing. Whereas in cruise flight, it's going to be over the center of the wing. And if I have a high angle of attack, the center of pressure is going to be toward the front of the wing. Okay. And center of pressure or center of lift, basically the same thing. And again, center of lift is denoted with a capital C and a capital L. A capital C and a subscript L is the coefficient of lift. And don't worry about those things too much. I don't think you're going to see any questions on those, but you do need to understand that because we do talk about that. There. All right. Let's see what else we have. Okay, wingtip vortices, another really important thing. All right. Let's actually let me just switch to the simulator here. And what we're going to do is, so on the wing here, we've got, let's just do it like this. So where is the low pressure on the wing? Is it up here? Is it down here? Where is the low pressure?
It's up top.
It's on this side of the wing, right? Low pressure is up there. Okay, so you got low pressure. We define that. Okay, where's the high pressure? It's down here. Okay, so let's look at the front here. So there's your lower side of the wing right down here. Here's the upper side of the wing. If let's say we have high pressure down, let's say the plane is just going to suspend here, and I've got air that's high right here, high pressure down here, and I have low pressure on here. How is the air going to interact between the two surfaces, the upper side and the lower side? Is this air up here going to want to get down to here? Or is the air that's here going to want to go up here? Think about in terms of a vacuum cleaner. Okay? It's going to want to go up. Exactly. Okay. So you've got low pressure up here, and just like a vacuum, if I hold a vacuum cleaner over the top of my wing and I turn it on, it's going to draw in air from under the wing as well as around it and things like that, right? That's what essentially we've got low pressure on the top of the wing. So that's acting like a vacuum cleaner, right? When you're moving through the air, however, you have the same things there. You've got, let me see what I'm here. Let's get right here. So you've got, the air hitting this wing right here from all these sides. Let's see if I can draw this right here. Okay. And what happens is, as it hits this bottom of the wing, it creates this high pressure here on the lower portion of the wing. And the top portion of the wing, you've got this low pressure area. So let me clear that off. Let's see. So you've got the low pressure up here. What happens is, as that air comes in and hits this right here, it's going to go down below, but it wants to get up to the top of the wing there where that low pressure is. So what it does is, it actually leaks around the edge of the outside of the wing here. Let me just do this again here. So here's our wind, it hits it right there. And as it goes across there, it realizes, okay, there's lower pressure up here, and it tries to escape up to that side. Okay, like this, it rolls up like that. But this aircraft is moving through the air, right? We're going maybe 100 knots. So what it does is, it actually winds up creating, let me just show you here. Let's clean this out. Just draw. see if I can do this. So you can see this here. Air hits this on the bottom side of the wing, but then it tries to go around the bottom and it tries to go to the top. Well, what happens is it actually creates a wingtip vortice. That's what we call there. And it's dramatic, especially when there's a high angle of attack, when you're producing lots of lift. Okay, if you're producing lots of lift, that means that you have to have a lot of low pressure on the top, right? It's just a result. You know, you have to create lift somehow. And when you're producing lots of lift, that means that there's lots of low pressure here. So that means those wingtip vortices that hit that are much larger. They actually create a lot. And these are significant. So if you fly into the trailing wingtip vortices of a 727 or 737, let's say, with a plane like this, it literally will break the aircraft apart. You know, if you hit a vortice, especially a fully loaded 737, and you fly right through the trailing edge of that, it'll just, it's like running into a brick wall. This is kind of off the subject, but has anybody ever seen the movie Die Hard? The second Die Hard, it was the one at the airport. So if you ever want to watch it was a good movie. But anyway, at the very end of the movie, our protagonist, Bruce Willis, is running on a runway, a real runway, and they're landing aircraft around him. And there's all this smoke and stuff like that. And as he's running parallel to the runway, a jet lands over the top of him. He's running, and you see these swirls in the smoke. This is all real. They didn't use CGI back then. They had to actually film these incidents so they could get it on in the movie. So anyway, he's running like this, right? And you see the swirl as the plane lands. He's running like this. The plane comes in, lands like that. He's running along like this. You see the swirl of the smoke from the vortices of the. It was probably like a 737 back there, so maybe a 757. He's running along, and this was not scripted at all. But that vortice was so strong, it just knocked him right off his feet. The actor, not the. This is you know, he's probably a pretty big guy, but the vortices are very strong. That just gives you an idea, and that's on the landing. That isn't even up in the air, and up in the air they can produce just massive amounts of vortices. So that's why it's important for us to understand, you know, how vortices work, and you know how to deal with them. There's also some other things in there. Yes.
So on 67, where the wind goes up, that cancels the vortices.
Doesn't cancel them out. You can never get rid of vortices completely, but it does. They actually use vortices to help produce forward lift. Is basically what it is. It's actually a really ingenious design. We don't have to know about that right now. So I tell you what, you guys, let's take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll have back at it and let everybody get some water or go bathroom or whatever. So
I have my aunt is a commercial airline pilot. She was talking about she had an instance where there was a fighter jet that went past, and because they were flying off radar, they didn't know they went past, and she didn't fly commercial, but she flies like 8 or 10 people at a time.
Yeah.
And they didn't know a plane had gone through. And it flipped the aircraft over.
Yeah, that's the wingtip vortices.
And because in commercial flight, what she does, can't fly behind an aircraft for 5 miles.
Right. And maybe we can talk about that next. To actually go through there's you can use time or distance on it. So and the thing is, you know, you have to keep in mind that the vortices do move through the air as well. They dissipate. Usually about 2 minutes is a safe time to fly through dissipated vortices.
Yeah, she flew into it. The aircraft completely flipped, and she was able to flip it back over. But then she ended up having to. She went to. I don't know what it's called, but she went because she got sued from the passengers. But then they had to see all the military planes because the vortice in the middle of the air is not.
Yeah, that would be a traffic conflict.
Yeah, because they had to contact the Air Force and their flight.
Also as potential, it depends on what happened there, but it would be a deviation of some sort. You'd have like a pilot, typically it's a pilot deviation. In this case, it may not have been, it could have been air ATC that routed them into the flight path or the trail of that aircraft.
Yeah.
But typically it's pilots that make mistakes out there. But again, it's a complex system. You know, aviation is just amazing. And we've got just an amazing system here in the U.S. But the mistakes do happen. People are people, and whether they're a pilot, ground crew, or ATC.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I'm actually just because it's so so long. That's interesting. Now you're my right. So have you graduated? Yeah, okay. So. Yeah. 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 Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We were research. Yeah.
Give you guys about another 4 minutes, and then we'll get back at it. Any questions so far? How you doing? Yeah.
So on the equity course there, it's different stall points.
I'm sorry, what was that now?
On the equity course there.
Yeah.
Those links at different stall points.
Uh-huh.
Does that have anything to do with AOA?
I guess the angle of attack would be kind of an average, you know, when you think of an angle of attack, it would be just the average of the aircraft. And then we calculate it out based on, I think You know, it would be like, I guess, an average chord line, I guess. You know, see, when you look at an aircraft, it does have a wing has some twist in it. So it's not like this right here. This wing is for illustration. There's no twist. Usually there's like a little bit of twist like this. You can see that there. And the F4U, Corsair, has got, you know, the gull wings, so it's down like this, and that one wing is up like that. Because of that, they don't pick a single chord line along the wing of the aircraft, the cross section. They use just basically an average of it. So now that also, that's an interesting one, because if you've got your flaps on the Corsair down, your angle of attack is going to be, again, the edge of the flaps, and that has steep flaps. And it's
Also, spots there.
they do, yeah, but it's okay. Actually, I didn't know
There's a
that.
lot.
So yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, maybe I would say it would probably be like an average, essentially, for the chord line. So, but again, that wing, because the wing doesn't shift at all, the wing itself never changes. You have ailerons on there and you have flaps. That does change the angle of attack when you use your flaps, but nothing else really changes it. You'd have to modify the wings. A good example is airliners. So airliners not only have flaps, but they have leading edge slats and all these additional lift and drag producing devices that change the chord line of it. And it's all in order to produce either more drag or more lift or both. You know, when they're coming into land, they want to get lots of drag and get that aircraft down, but they also want to have lots of lift, so when they come down, you know, naturally, when you produce lots of lift, though, you're just going to produce lots of drag. It's just, again, one of Newton's laws: for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So, a good question. All right, one more minute, guys, and then we'll get back at it. Does everybody so far understand vortices, wingtip vortices? Yeah.
So on the F-14 with the swing wings, they produce less lift when they're sweeping back.
Yeah.
Why is that? Do you
For
know?
less
They must
drag.
say
It's already
Yeah, you're right. It's decreasing the drag is what's happening there. When they sweep the wings back, and that's an example of, okay, you're changing the structure of the aircraft there. But obviously, most aircraft don't have swing wings. You know, I think in the early days, I think they experimented with actually changing the camber of the wing. You know, the wings back then were very different than they are now. They actually bent the wings. You know, they call it wing warping. This is the early days of aviation. So those were constantly the angle of attack, the critical angle of attack would be changing. I think every time you warp the wing. It'd be stay around with that close thing. But again, most aircraft these days, other than the 14, is that 14, right? That has the swing wings, yeah.
it makes me want to keep us guys.
It does. Mhm. Oh, that's right, the aardvark. Yeah. Are they still flying that?
In some countries they do, but they
Not
they
here.
retired.
All right, let's, interesting. Okay, let's get back to this. So let's close up this chapter right now. So again, wingtip vortices, everybody understands how that works. So here's the airflow right here. It goes under, and it wants to reach that low pressure. We're looking down at the wing from the top here. We're looking at the top of the wing right here. But again, as the air flows under the wing right here, as it passes through the air, that air wants to get to the top low pressure area, and so it creates these wingtip vortices. The one thing you need to know about wingtip vortices, they are the worst when the aircraft is heavily loaded, like a 747 that's fully loaded, and when the aircraft is in a clean configuration. Flaps help to if the flaps are out, leading edge slats and everything like that, those help to dampen some of the vortices, but it still produces large vortices. So with a small aircraft, you can produce pretty good vortices. And it'd be fun to actually maybe play around with this. What we can do is set off a smoke bomb near the edge of the runway and have an aircraft fly through it, so you could actually see the vortices. So we can replicate that scene they had in Die Hard too. So if you ever watch that movie again, it's at the very end of the movie. Yeah, that's a good illustration right there. So, and I think that's later in the book, isn't it? Or is that? Okay, yeah. So there's, in the book there's a page there that actually has an example of a wingtip vortice with smoke and everything on there. So, all right, so let's talk about aerodynamics of flight. We've already covered a lot of this stuff, so now we're going to dig in a little bit deeper. This is a long chapter, so we probably won't be able to get through everything. I was hoping we would be able to get through this today. The next chapter after this is flight controls, which I'm very easy. Yeah, it really is just a review. You guys already know this stuff, so but we'll spend most of the rest of our time today on this aerodynamics of flight. Okay, so the four forces of flight. You're going to hear this, that four forces of flight. You'll hear that term a lot. What are the four forces? They're right here. You got lift, counteracting drag. You've got thrust, lift, counteracting weight, thrust, counteracting drag. All right, so you've got thrust here. What produces thrust? The engine. Drag is basically, all of this aircraft here, various things, how we control the aircraft. It's pitched up. This aircraft, let's say our flight path is in this direction right here. We have relatively what we call low induced drag here, something like that. And we induce more drag when we increase our angle of attack. Let's say if our angle of attack is like this, and our flight path is right here. Now we've got lots of induced drag. So when you think of the term induced, that is referring to somebody inducing, right, something like in this case, lift of the aircraft, which again is going to produce lots of drag. Again, like our hand sticking out the side of a car window, go like this, and feel lots of drag on it, right? So again, that's one of the types of drag. There's several different types of drag. It's not just one type of drag. So that's induced is one of the big ones, though. Okay. And then weight of the aircraft. The aircraft is, if it weighs 1,000 pounds here in my hand, it's going to weigh 1,000 pounds up there. So that means we have to produce sufficient lift, 1,000 pounds of lift, right, to keep it at that altitude where we're flying at, right? Yep. Yeah, there is. You can get, actually, if you really want to get into this, there's a book that doesn't cost you anything. It's a PDF. It's called Aerodynamics for Naval Aviators. And I think it was written back in the 50s or 60s. And it's an incredibly detailed look into the aerodynamics of aircraft. I don't get into a lot of the details of it. I think it's enough that you have to deal with all this stuff. But if you really want to get into it, if you're thinking about getting into aeronautical engineering, that's a must-have book. And it's just a PDF you can download from the FAA website. I think we might even have it on our learning website. And it gets into a lot of the formulas that are used to calculate the amount of lift that a service is producing. And when I say formulas, I mean I'm talking tons of formulas. You really get your head into that if you want to get into that. I know it's required reading, I think, for all Air Force pilots, and I'm sure Ethan and Holly, right? Holly's dad had to go through it and probably knows it extremely well to learn all the facets of the physics of flight there. So yeah, that would be a place I would go. It's not fun reading, I'll tell you that. So unless you're an aeronautical engineer, you're really gonna be excited about that, but it's not something that gets me really excited. So all right. So again, here's the same thing I just talked about. If you have a 2,000 pound aircraft, this diagram right here, we're seeing 2,000 pound aircraft. We have 2,000 pounds of lift acting up. Weight is 2,000 pounds. You've got thrust of 200 pounds and drag 200 pounds. This is in steady flight. And you can, when the plane goes into a climb, are those forces all the same there? Okay, we've got two no's. If I'm in a climb, in a steady climb, are all those forces the same? In a steady climb, yes. Yeah, absolutely. This gets a lot of people wrong answers on the quiz, not understanding that. If I'm in a descent like this, in a steady descent, are all those forces equal? Absolutely. Again, anytime you have the aircraft is in a steady flight condition, then all of those forces are equal. Okay. Yeah, we get into that. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So, all right. So, flight path. You guys understand flight path and relative wind. Again, they're equal and opposite of each other. They're parallel. They run parallel. Flight path is the direction the aircraft is flying in. Again, my flight path is like this. What's my flight path right now? If I'm starting right here, what's my flight path? Just straight. So vertical line up. If my flight plan here, if my flight path is, if the plane's going this way, what's my flight path? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So again, it's again important to know there. All right. So again, this CL, again, the uppercase C and the uppercase L, that's the center of lift, not coefficient of lift. I can't stress that enough, and I wish they had a better way of denoting that. But so that's the center of lift, and that changes with the angle of attack there. The center of gravity. This is an important one.
If you were to have a plane with reverse thrust, and the reverse thrust was equivalent to forward thrust, could you take off backwards?
It's possible. Talk to me after the class. Well, that's interesting. Okay. So let's talk about center of gravity. Center of gravity is incredibly important. We needed to make sure that the aircraft is in balance. If the aircraft is out of balance when we fly, we could get into a situation that, it gets into a stall and we can't get out of it. It happens a lot. Pilots will sometimes load up the tail of the aircraft. Let's say right here you've got, like in golf clubs or whatever, and a bunch of baggage, and you've got 2 passengers here and another 2 passengers up front. You can easily overload the aircraft. And it's not just that the aircraft can't produce sufficient lift to carry all that stuff. That's one problem. The more serious problem is if the weight of the aircraft is too far back and that center of gravity is too far back. What will happen is if you slow the aircraft down or it gets into a stall, you may not be able to recover from that. And again, we know what a stall is now, right? The aircraft stops producing sufficient lift to keep the wings, basically the aircraft at that altitude, so it drops. The problem is to break a stall, we need to get that air flowing over the top of the wing. And to do that, we need to push the nose down, right? We've got to get that, we've got to add power, obviously, but the first thing you do in a stall to recover from it is get that nose down, get air. That's your biggest bang for the buck. You get air flowing over the wing, and now it's smoother. You don't have that turbulent air in the back there. So then the aircraft will recover from that stall. But if you have too much weight in the back, so let's do a little test here. So let's say I'm holding, let's see if I can find the center of gravity of this aircraft. So right there, it's a little bit back. It's just a model. Basically, right here we've got my finger right here. This is the center. Let's just assume this is the center of gravity for the aircraft. Okay. If I put a ton of weight, let's say the aircraft weighs 1,000 pounds, I put 500 pounds of weight on the tail of this aircraft. What's the aircraft going to do? It's going to go back like this. Now, there's nothing you can do in the world. You can have the strongest engine. Maybe you could fly out of it, I guess, with a really powerful engine and lots of thrust. But for most of the engines of these, you can give it full power and push the control yoke all the way in, and it's just not going to recover. That's an extreme example of loading the aircraft too far aft. All right. Normally, when you load an aircraft, there are little, they call them stations or whatever. There's an area like here for a baggage compartment. You've got an area right here for passengers in the rear, and then you've got the pilot and co-pilot up front right here. So just because you have all that space does not necessarily mean that you can load it all up. You have to be very careful. You calculate. There's a chapter we have dedicated to weight balance. It's so critical. And to this day, there are still accidents where pilots, they load their aircraft incorrectly. They don't understand the performance. Maybe they're at a high altitude airport, or maybe it's a really hot, humid day. That's going to change the performance of the aircraft itself. So it may not be able to even take off the ground. So that's why I say weight balance is way more important, I think, than overloading the aircraft, especially if you go extremely low, because the aircraft just won't take off. Of course, it'll run on a runway and run off the end of the runway if you're too heavily loaded. But weight balance is even more so, because the problem with that is if you have a slightly aft center of gravity beyond the ranges of the limits of the aircraft, when you take off, you may not notice. You may think, oh, well, the plane's flying great, and get up to altitude, and then something happens, you do an abrupt maneuver, you get into a stall, and then you can't get out of it. That's why it's so dangerous. When you're up there, you have very few options. When you're on the ground, if you run out of runway, okay, you're running into some grass and hopefully not into trees. But the center of gravity, though, is really important that you understand that. Okay. All right, so the center of gravity, again, another interesting point about center of gravity, that's where basically all the axes run through. So you've got your vertical axis that runs through the center of gravity, you've got your longitudinal and your lateral. So that's if you're going to draw an aircraft with the axes on it, they would all go through that center of gravity here. And generally speaking, the center of gravity does not move in flight unless, well, what changes the center of gravity? If you have weight on this side and weight on this side, is there any weight that changes? Anyway, I do a 3-hour flight. Is there going to be any fuel? Yeah, you're burning fuel. That's going to change your center of gravity. All right. If somebody walks or moves their seat forward, that's going to change the center of gravity. And I'm not talking, you wouldn't notice it. You will notice when somebody shifts their seat in your aircraft. No matter, I mean, it seems like, okay, that's impossible. How did that happen? I know, I think maybe I told you this before. I know a friend of mine was a retired 747 pilot, and he could tell when a flight attendant, when they were doing trans-Pacific flights, he could tell when a flight attendant walked from one portion of the plane to the other. And he's sitting up in the cockpit, right? 747s are a big aircraft. And this is, maybe 110, 120 pound person walking from one, maybe like 10 seats back. He could actually feel that in a 747. So that's how finely balanced aircraft are. They're very sensitive to weight, and then, you could see it. Maybe for the center of gravity, you could actually put a pin under the plane and balance it finely on a pin. If you could, find out where the center of gravity is, that's how sensitive it is there. And when you do that, that's what we call fulcrum, right? Okay, it's like a teeter-totter. Okay, we all know how teeter-totters work. If you have, a heavier person on this side and a lighter person on this side, it's gonna swing like this. It's gonna, especially if the fulcrum point is right, halfway between the two, the heavier person is gonna cause that one side to go down. So we get into this again, weight balance. So, but anyway, that's center of gravity. We use it a lot. We'll talk a lot about that. So lift. Yeah, and then here, this is something that's kind of new, a rearward component of weight. So your component of weight opposed to lift, that's different than the rearward component of weight. You've got your total weight and you have your total lift. That's the total amount of well, your weight is always going to stay the same, but the weight does have vectors in it. And you've got weight that's opposed to lift, you have weight that is acting rearward. There's better ways to describe this than we have here, but and then you have your lift, you have your total lift that, again, the aircraft is producing as a whole, you have lift that the wing is producing, you have lift that the elevator may be producing, a negative or positive lift there. And then all these surfaces here, the fuselage and everything like that, those are all producing a small amount of lift. They all contribute to the total lift of the aircraft. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I put this game called Tronic, and when I build planes in the game,
yeah,
you do actually get all that credit, the lifts,
mm-hmm.
You actually get that all centered, so then
yes, yeah, it works the same in real life. So you have to have the aircraft, like I said, is very finely balanced. That center of gravity does shift over time. So again, if you burn fuel and passengers move their seats around, that center of gravity is going to move, just like it would on a teeter-totter. If you had a gallon of fuel that you put on a teeter-totter on this side, and then the person over here, if you empty some of the fuel here, it's going to cause the teeter-totter to swing that way. Same with an aircraft; it does the exact same thing. All right. If this person on this side, for instance, moves up the teeter-totter to this point right here, okay, well, now they don't have as much leverage. If they're out here, they have a lot more leverage. Let's say the center of gravity, the fulcrum point is right here. They have a lot more leverage out here as opposed to being right here. It's more balanced. Okay. So these, again, all these concepts you have to kind of understand. And again, we get into this in detail and with weight balancing. All right, so level high-speed flight. This is an example, flight path, relative. And again, I think you guys understand this. Just 3 degrees angle of attack on this particular wing. This is, typically maybe, when the aircraft is flying cruise flight, you're only going to have 3 degrees angle of attack. Now, as a pilot, are you going to be thinking about this stuff? No. You do have to understand the concepts here, but you're not going to say, okay, well, I've got, my angle of attack is 3 degrees right now. I want to get it to 4 degrees. No, you're going to use your performance gauges and other instruments to determine, basically, am I, flying in the right settings and stuff like that. That's what you're concerned with. But you need to understand this so that you don't get into some of the problems that plague some pilots, all of us actually, potentially. So, cruise flight, and maybe a little bit slower right here. You have a higher angle of attack. So let's talk about this. So if you're in level high-speed flight, all right, and you're at, let's say we're at 1,000 feet, okay. If I reduce the thrust, what am I going to have to do in the plane to maintain the 1,000-foot altitude? If I reduce my thrust, okay, let's think about this. You reduce your thrust. What is it doing to the aircraft? What is the thrust doing to the aircraft? It's producing drag. Okay, partially. What else is it doing? What is thrust doing for us? Yep. Okay, lift, exactly. The thrust there moving through the air is producing lift, right? It's using a little bit of Newton on the bottom side and a little bit of Bernoulli on the top, right? So it's producing lift. If we're going really fast, we're producing more lift. The faster you move, the more lift you're producing. So you don't need as much of an angle of attack. Now, if you start slowing down, if I reduce my thrust, okay, what do I have to do with the controls to maintain that altitude?
Increasing angle.
You got to increase your angle of attack. How do you increase the angle of attack?
Pull back on the yoke.
Yoke, pull back on the yoke, yeah. So you're going to pull back on the yoke, it's going to increase your angle of attack, and now you have a higher angle of attack. The higher angle of attack is producing more lift. It's also producing more drag, yes, but it's producing more lift and keeping. It's more importantly, it's producing sufficient lift to keep the aircraft in the air at 1,000 feet. Okay, so there's all these chains of events. You're more concerned with the beginning change, all right? So I need to slow down the aircraft. If I want to stay at my altitude, I need to pull back on the yoke. That's what you're thinking about. You're not thinking, well, my angle of attack is it 6 degrees, 5 degrees? No. Aviation would be much more complex. It would be very fun if you had to worry about that stuff. But again, if we understand it, it helps keep us out of trouble. Okay. All right. Low speed flight. Let's say we're traveling really slow, but we want to stay at 1,000 feet. What do we have to do with our control yoke? How does it affect our angle of attack? Let's get somebody else in here. Anybody else want to tell me how that works? So if we, let's say we're at 1,000 feet and I bring my throttle way back, all right? This was maybe, let's say we had 2,400 RPM on this one right here at 1,000 feet. This one we set at 2,000 RPM on the engine. So each one of these we're producing less thrust on the engine. And then this one, let's say we're producing we have it at 1,700 RPM. What are we going to have to do in the plane to go from 2,000 RPM on the engine, higher thrust, to go to this lower thrust or this 1,700 or 1,600 RPM? What do we need to do to maintain our altitude? What controls are we going to do and why? Anybody? Right. You're going to pull back on the yoke. You're going to increase, which increases what? It does increase lift, but I'm looking for what it does in relation to the wings. Or like, what's that? I'm sorry, speak up a little bit more. Angle of attack, yes. We're increasing our angle of attack by pulling back on the yoke. Yeah. Did you relate to that? Okay. Okay. So again, we're increasing our angle of attack. Now, when we start getting slow, again, we're at 12 degrees. What did we say was at 16 degrees roughly on most aircraft? Critical angle of attack. So let's say we pull the power all the way back, and now we're starting to slow down. We need to pull back on the yoke, right? all right? But at some point, we're going to reach that critical angle of attack, that 16 degrees, right? Or 17 degrees, whatever it is for that particular aircraft. And then what's going to happen?
You can start.
Yeah, it's going to stall. Again, when people talk and think stalls, they think, oh gosh, the plane is just going to instantly go into a spiral. Some aircraft, if it's an aerobatic aircraft, yeah, they're designed to be a little unstable, but they need to have instability so that you can do the snap rolls and the rolls. They need that instability there. But most of the aircraft like these right here, they're designed to be very safe. So this is what a stall looks like most of the time. You're flying along, you hit that critical angle of attack, and the nose just drops. And it's not like a really exciting maneuver. Sometimes you feel the seat of your pants. Yeah, it's you're producing less lift, so the aircraft is going to start falling. Now, in some aircraft, if they're not trimmed correctly, they may dip a wing. That's easy to fix. All you do is you just apply the opposite rudder. Obviously, the first thing you want to do in a stall, so you've got this high angle of attack, this critical angle of attack that we're at. The aircraft hits that angle of attack. The first thing you want to do, you're going to hear a stall warning go off, by the way, in the aircraft. All you have to do is push the yoke in. That's going to cause the wing to drop, or the angle of attack to instantly drop. It's going to be closer now. If you point it down to the direction the aircraft is stalling in, it's going to instantly feed more smooth air over the top of the wings, producing lift, and you'll recover from the stall. It's all it is. It's nothing like super terrifying or anything like that. Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. And if I take you guys up, if you want to do that, we'll actually do it. What I do is I'll set up. So the question was, have you ever done a roller coaster and felt what it feels like in a roller coaster? So what we'll do is I put a pen on the dash, the top of the dash, the instrument panel there. And what I'll do is I'll pull back on the control yoke, and I will nose over the aircraft so you're feeling 0 Gs. And you'll actually see the pen float up in the air, and you have to grab it. And I tell them, just grab the pen. I won't do it if you feel squeamish about it. I won't do that to passengers. And I've botched them before where I've put too much forward pressure on it, and the pen sails up to the ceiling, and all the junk on the floor rises up a little bit. Now, if you do aerobatics, aerobatics is a lot of fun because you do that all day long, and it is really a lot of fun. But when you do that, all the dirt on the floor flies up, hits you in the face and stuff like that. You have to get used to that kind of stuff. So, yep. What's that? It is. You have to open the doors up. So, yeah. Oh no! Seriously, that's terrible. So, the dog may like it a little bit, so I don't know. I think my dog would actually like it. So,
but
she pulls down the like sleep and she's
yeah, it's you want to be careful with it, obviously, and it's not. I don't recommend, especially as a student pilot, you definitely don't do things like that. You want to make sure that you're in an area where there is absolutely no other traffic. I would never do this if around a pattern where there's other airplanes. That is extremely risky. And if you go too far, I mean, you can exceed what the FAA deems as safe. And if they see you doing that stuff, they may say, all right, well, this guy's a risk for flying. But if you do a gentle pull up and just nudge the plane over to get to 0 Gs, it's not a real violent maneuver. It just feels like it because you're not used to those G forces. And really on the ground, the only time that we ever feel zero G is when we jump up in the air and are on our way down for maybe a fraction of a second. So on the airplane, I can actually afford to do that. For a long period of time, relatively long, like 3 to 4 seconds or something like that. So, all right, let's get back to topic here. Oh yeah.
When doing those, because of the type of engine you use, like with a carburetor, you have a float.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that affect the?
It certainly could for a long period of time. If you have a float carburetor, so if you fly inverted like this in a carbureted aircraft that's not designed for it, the engine will quit.
Yeah. So is that why aeronautic planes that do the stunts and stuff?
They have special carburetors, or they have fuel injection.
Yeah, fuel injected. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So these are types of aircraft that can reduce. Hey guys. So these are aircraft that actually can vector thrust. again, most of the general aviation aircraft, the direction of the thrust is, perpendicular to the prop, facing backwards, right? But these can actually adjust their thrust. The Osprey obviously can rotate these engine pods here, and then obviously the Harrier jump jet has got vectored nozzles in the back here, and so they can adjust their thrust. I don't know why they put it in there, but I guess they want you to know that, that there are some types of aircraft that have vector thrust there. So, let's see here.
Also,
Yeah. Mhm. Okay. All right. So in there, we're going to start getting into some charts, and I do apologize. Some of these get really involved. Whenever you look at these charts, these diagrams, to understand them, the first thing you need to do is look at the X and Y axes, the titles for them. So here we've got two different items on here. So what this tells me, lift drag right here, and then coefficient of drag right here, which is opposite of coefficient of oh gosh, I don't know actually the term for it. Basically, it's the amount of drag that a wing produces, I think, is what they're getting at here. With various angles of attack, yeah. I suppose it would be for the entire aircraft. So, so let's take a look at this so we understand. So on this side, if we increase our angle of attack right here, you can see all the angles are going up here, then something's going on up here. So let's take a look at 10 degrees. We go here, and it looks like our coefficient of drag is 0.08 right here. So what this is telling me, when I look at a chart or diagram like this, I follow the x-axis here, and as I go up here, I look at this chart right here. In the red, we can see that our coefficient of drag, if I draw a line over there, our coefficient of drag increases. So all this is telling me is that our coefficient of drag increases as we increase our angle of attack. Does that make sense? Okay, you look at that diagram. It looks complicated. It really does. And even myself, I've been flying for over 30 years, and it's like, okay, I don't want to have to learn that. I know how this stuff works, but I don't want to have to think about this when I'm flying. So, but it's good to know it. So again, coefficient of drag right here, and it's this right here is actually the coefficient of drag, not the red line there. That's the coefficient of lift max there. And this is the orange line is the coefficient of drag. So again, as my, I'll get to you in just a second here. As the angle of attack increases, you can see the coefficient of drag increases. And at some point, notice how it goes up really steep here. You see how that orange line just goes straight up here? That's telling me that at some point, probably at your critical angle of attack right here, it's probably close to around 18 to 19 degrees. It's just going to skyrocket. And what that is telling us is that, we're trying to fly like this, and the coefficient of drag is just too high. Okay, does that kind of make sense? All right.
So that then put the plane back.
No, it worse what would happen. I mean, if the plane was loaded correctly, it would just, it's going to want to get back to equilibrium. It's going to want to nose over if it's loaded correctly. If it's loaded too far aft, that center of gravity is too far aft, then you can actually get into a situation that would be really bad, where it just washes down like this. You can push the yoke in all the way, and it still won't break that stall. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at how angle of attack affects the coefficient of lift. All right, so as angle of attack increases here, the coefficient of lift does what? It keeps increasing, right? And then at some point, again, I think what they're using for tell me where on this diagram you would see where you'd think the critical angle of attack would be at. What's the degrees? Let's see if we can get somebody else to answer that. What would be the number of degrees for the critical angle of attack? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. 19 to 20, yeah. And we can actually see it right here. CL max, that's the coefficient of lift max. Right about here, it just starts falling off right there. So if I wanted to produce the maximum amount of lift, I'm probably going to be right between like somewhere around 19 to 20 degrees of angle of attack. That'll give me my maximum lift for that aircraft. Obviously, we're producing lots of drag at that. And then shortly after that, it just drops right off. That line is, that red line is denoting there. Okay. All right. And then, yeah.
So with the lift max.
See that coefficient of lift max.
Yeah,
Yeah.
coefficient of lift max.
Mhm.
So it goes up from 0 with lift. Wouldn't with the it would keep going down until 0.
Yeah, so the coefficient of lift, obviously, if the angle of attack is at 0, it's not going to be producing any lift.
But if you're in a stall and it keeps going, the coefficient lift max is at 20.
Right.
But if you keep adding, it would
Adding what? Power.
Angle of attack.
Angle of attack, yeah.
Because the line isn't going straight down and it arcs down, couldn't you still have some leeway?
That is actually a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. So, and you could actually demonstrate this in a real aircraft. It's actually a lot of fun. You may not like it the first time you do it, but it's actually kind of cool. So what you do is you can actually get the aircraft into a stall, right? And so when you get into that critical angle of attack, that's just saying that all it's saying is that it's not producing sufficient lift to stay at that altitude. Well, you can actually fold the yoke all the way back, and you can fly the aircraft down like this. It's still producing enough lift. It's like a leaf floating down from the sky, but you can still control it with rudder and just hold that yoke all the way back. And all you're doing is just controlling it with rudder, and it'll literally float down like this. It's a really good exercise, and it gets you really comfortable with stalls. If you're a little frightened of them, this will boost your confidence by doing that. So you're right. So it doesn't. What you're saying there is the coefficient of lift doesn't just go straight down at 20 degrees. It actually drops down precipitously at say around like 22 degrees, somewhere around there. That's where it really drops off. When you hit that, then obviously the plane is just it's going to drop. But in this range right here, you still have some controllability because you do have some lift on the wings. That's the thing. Again, a lot of times people don't understand when the aircraft stalls, you're not losing all of that lift. You may lose 100 pounds of lift. Well, that's enough to let the plane start falling down a little bit.
Yeah, okay? And depending on what aircraft, so go up and that you can increase your altitude with the lift.
With thrust.
Thrust and lift. So if you have 100% thrust on your aircraft and you're at critical lift max, and what on the CL, the red line, if it's a steady flight at a certain speed is 1, couldn't you keep going, adding AOA until you hit 1 and then you'd start dropping?
Yeah, so you're confusing, the angle of attack and stall and pitch with the aircraft. So again, thrust has nothing to do with the stalling speed or angle of attack. Okay, you need to get that out of your mind, because if just because an aircraft has got like lots of thrust does not necessarily mean it's going to change the angle of attack and a stall or something like that. The angle of attack is always going to be the angle of attack, regardless of whether you've got 100 pounds of thrust or 10,000 pounds of thrust. That angle of attack is always going to be the same. Okay, that critical angle of attack. It just, if you have lots of thrust, that means you've got lots of excess power to climb that aircraft up. The angle of attack still may be, like this, critical angle of attack like this, but you've got lots of thrust that's just carrying the aircraft up. Okay, so, and again, these are good questions, but this is why it's really important to understand there's a separation between, thrust and angle of attack. And pitch, again, a lot of times pitch confuses people and those two. Yep.
So no matter how much thrust you have, there's a certain angle where the wing stops.
Right. Regardless of the thrust, doesn't make a difference how much thrust you have. You could have 0 thrust like a glider, and it's, you know, or we add 1,000 pounds of thrust onto that, that aircraft will still stall at that same critical angle of attack, right? It has to do with the shape of the wing and, you know, the relative width, the chord line and that relative, right, or the flight path, right? So let's look at the green line right here. This is the lift to drag. That L/D stands to lift to drag ratio. So here, as we started at 0, the lift to drag ratio is 0. You know, it's just basically 1:1, right? And as we increase our angle of attack, we can now see our, you know, lift to drag ratio increase, and we get at about 6 degrees, we get to the maximum lift to drag ratio. So what that means is you've got more, 6 times as much. I don't know, 6 times as much. You've got the most amount of lift that you're going to get out of the wing compared to drag. All right. So if you have, you know, your lift is 1,000 pounds and your drag is I don't know how to really word that. It's you're getting the most lift compared to the amount of drag right there. So this is typically where you're going to, you know, find your best glide ratio and things like that. If you lose an engine, you're going to want to pitch the aircraft so that you're roughly at that angle of attack. Normally, you're going to just look for an airspeed on your indicator, airspeed indicator, and say, I'm going to try to keep the airspeed at that airspeed. You know, if I lose an engine, then they like all the checklists, they'll have like most of them anyway, have a glide speed. You know, if you lose an engine or something like that, and they need different glide speeds. Glide speed is going to be totally different with gear out. It's going to be different with flaps out. Maybe the different loading is going to change the amount of or the glide speed. So those are all things. Oh, that definitely will. If you have different, if the aircraft is weighted differently, if you have more passengers, the glide speed is going to have to change if you want to get the most out of the aircraft. So, all right. So, all right. So this is another diagram here. So you've got angle of attack on the bottom. Again, always, whenever you're looking at these diagrams, always look at the X and Y axis so that you understand, you know, what it is that you're reading. In this case, angle of attack right here in the bottom. So what happens as the in this chart right here, we've got this you know arc right here. If I read 8 degrees, or let's start out at 0 right here. I go across here, we're at like 0.25 or 0.23, something like that, for our coefficient of lift. Again, that's the coefficient of lift, not the center of lift there. As I increase my angle of attack, go up here, and you can see here again, it's going to be roughly in this area. And as we're seeing here is this is just measuring, it's comparing coefficient of lift compared to angle of attack. So as my angle of attack, all this is telling me is as my angle of attack increases, my coefficient of lift is going to increase in the air, on the wing itself, until we get to what?
SIA.
Critical angle of attack, right. When we get to that, the wing just doesn't produce any more lift. It says, sorry, you know, I'm done. then it starts falling off. And then this is there you can still control the aircraft if you're careful. And then at some point it's going to drop off precipitously, and it's just going to you're going to lose all lift on it. But you'd have to really be in a difficult, you know, a real tight situation. It can happen in what we call accelerated maneuvers, and that happens actually when you come in for landing. You potentially could do an accelerated maneuver. We'll get into that later on. I should have introduced that, but it's basically you're putting a huge load on the aircraft and you're pulling back on control. So you're changing the load factor of the aircraft, and that creates a tremendous amount of force in the aircraft, and it will cause the wing to stall more. But again, we're going to go into that later. All right. Let's see here. Right, yeah. So there's different types of drag. You're going to have, like in this case, we've got the wheels. They really don't produce much lift once you take off the ground. When they're on the ground, they produce 100% lift, right? Because you're holding up a 1,000-pound aircraft. Those wheels, all 3 of them, are going to hold that 1,000 pounds up. In the air, they just produce drag. So here's again a round surface right here. You've got the tire strut here, and then you've got all this drag. So this is an example of a type of drag that you're going to see in an aircraft. With landing fairings, this is the cover here. This is just an uncovered tire. with landing fairings, it does cut down the amount of drag there. You can see there's a fairing right here. We've got the strut that comes down to connect the tire there to the aircraft. Here we've got a nice smooth fairing over that, so it does have a tendency to reduce the amount of drag. Now it depends. Like some aircraft, like this one, this is a good example. So if you look at that one, that's got the tire fairings there, as well as the fairings for the structure to hold the tires of the aircraft itself. So it does reduce the amount of drag. But there are some types of aircraft, you're going to be taking, maybe you're just traveling the backcountry, you really don't care how much drag the aircraft, things like this produce. Maybe you just want to get into a small 500-foot strip, so it's not that big of a deal. You don't have to have fairings on. A lot of aircraft do have fairings, and that's to cut down on drag because they want you to get to your destination faster, right? Or you want to get to your destination faster. Yep.
So could those linear fairings, could those act as tiny wings?
They actually do produce some lift. We'll talk about that in a second. So the statement was, can fairings produce a little bit of small amount of lift? And the answer is definitely yes. When we talk about lift, we generally talk about the lift that the wing is producing, but we also talk about total lift. So you don't think about this much. You think that the wings are doing all the lifting. That's not true. The whole surface of the aircraft is producing lift, and there's small components of the aircraft that are producing lift. Conversely, there are all of this stuff is potentially causing drag. So you've got lift and drag that are being produced when the aircraft moves through the air. Just the fact that this has mass to it, it has like a surface area when it hits the wind. So if I'm flying at you like this, what the wind sees is this big surface area, it hits it and it slows it down. That's just drag that happens with every aircraft. The only way you can get around that would be to have an aircraft that is literally an atom's thickness thin to fly through the air. Everything is going to produce drag.
If you were to add a control surface to that, to the part that connects the gear to the plane, you were to add a control surface, would that work?
I'm sorry, say it one more time. No.
If you were to add a control surface to the part that connects the wheels to the plane, if you were to add a control surface, would that affect anything?
Yeah, it sure would. They don't do it because it's an added expense, because you have to run cables down there or hydraulics or something like that. On some aircraft, maybe fighter aircraft, they may actually have flaps down in the gear wells that increase lift. And some retractable gear aircraft actually are designed. I think mine does have doors that expand to modify the airflow as it's coming down. So it just creates a little bit more drag, and I'm sure that's for aerodynamic stability and stuff like that. So, all right. So again, this one right here, we're talking about parasitic drag. What is parasitic drag? So let me define it for you guys to answer it. Okay. So parasitic drag is basically anything that is that creates small drag forces on the aircraft. It can be like rivets and things like that. It could be, it's basically the structure of the aircraft and all its little components that conspire basically to slow down the aircraft. It's just like it can be rivets, it can be struts, the tires. Those are all things that produce a certain amount of parasitic drag. So when you have that, the faster you go, the more drag it produces. So let me explain that here. So for parasitic drag, let's say we've got a rivet. At slow speed, that rivet is not going to produce that much drag, right? You got a little rivet right here on the wing, let's say. All right. When you're flying really slow, according to this graph, you can see it right here. This graph, as you're flying slow, that rivet is just not producing that much drag. Even if you have hundreds of rivets on the wing, because the air is just moving slowly over the wing, it doesn't produce much drag. But when you start increasing your airspeed to really fast, all of those little rivets are now producing, they're producing lots of drag. You have all those little air molecules hitting it. You've got Newton busy at work because every time a particle hits one of those rivets, it's pushing the wing down, right? Or it's creating little turbulences behind the aircraft. So again, parasitic drag is characterized by it's mostly apparent at high speed flight, and that's why we can't just fly at like super fast speeds in most aircraft, because that parasitic drag just gets so high, it just, at some point, there's not enough thrust to get the plane to go faster. Okay. And it plays a big part in it. That's parasite or parasitic drag. Okay. Now let's take a look at another type of drag. Induced drag. Okay. What is it? I think you guys already know this. Does anybody want to take a stab at what induced drag is? Anybody else? You guys are answering a lot of questions. So, well, actually, what you want to do it? Go ahead. Yeah. Oh, really good. Okay. Drag that is produced with the association of lift, right? Okay. So what produces lift on this aircraft? The wings produce lift. Okay. That's induced drag. Yeah. What else induces drag? Fuselage, yeah. But what else? Is there something I can do as a pilot? When you think induced, think of a person. Exactly. Yeah, you pull back on the yoke. What does that do? It's that new network. When you put your hand out to some car window, put it up like this, you're creating a massive amount of induced drag, which is causing your hand to move back. So just try that when you're in the car next time. Hold your hand out like this, and you'll feel it want to push back. That's induced drag. That's not parasitic drag, like the little rivets and all these little other little things that are hanging off of the antennas and whatnot. That's the parasite drag. The induced drag is what we do. Induced drag. We're inducing drag on it. That's the way to think of induced drag. It's you actually pulling back or increasing it. You're increasing the flaps. Let's say you drop the flaps. That's going to add a certain amount of induced drag. What's that? Yeah, it's basically you're controlling the aircraft. You're inducing this. You're actually causing the wings to pull back. That's just going to cause just the fuselage hitting all that momentum. So it's not when you think of the wing, when you pull back on the control yoke, it's not just hitting this wing here. It's also hitting the fuselage here. Those little air particles are hitting the bottom side of the aircraft. That's creating lots of drag. Okay, that's induced drag. All right, so now let's put these two together. Let's see if I can get this. There we go. All right, so now we've got both, in this diagram, we've got both induced and parasite drag. Okay, so on the bottom here, we've got airspeed. So the faster we go on this side right here, if I draw a line right here, okay, this is fast on this side right here. So I'll just say fast. This is slow right here. Okay, and drag, this is low drag right here. There, low drag, and this is high drag here, up here. So down here on the lower side of the airspeed curve, or this curve right here. So when the aircraft is really slow, you're going to have more of the induced drag. Your induced drag here, you can see it right there. It shows the curved line there. Your induced drag is going to have to, be really high if you want to stay at, let's say, 1,000 feet. So at 1,000 feet, you have to have a high amount of induced drag, because you have to, your angle of attack is going to be higher, which is going to keep this induced drag high, right? Now, the faster we go at 1,000 feet, let's say we fly straight and level here, we're cruising along. Now we're moving fast. We don't have as high angle of attack, and our induced drag drops down to nothing, because we're actually pushing our yoke in. We're flying at 1,000 feet, let's say, and that induced drag drops down to nothing. But what happens, according to this graph, what happens when we hit high speed there? What's the other side of the equation there?
Parasitic drag.
Parasitic drag, yeah, it's going way up to the point where we can't go any faster. This is our maximum speed in the aircraft. We just can't go faster than that unless we point the nose down. If we're in steady flight, let's say we give it full power, we just cannot go faster than that, because there's too much. The parasitic drag overcomes the amount of thrust that we have available to us to fly. Does that make sense? Okay. Again, very important concepts. This one, you're going to see this a lot. You'll definitely see this diagram on the test. When you see this diagram, don't just assume that it's always going to be drag versus airspeed. They put like lift, drag. They put various different types of X and Y axes on here. So you need to look at those diagrams really carefully there to make sure that you understand what it is they're trying to show you there. So, right. All right, so this is a form drag. Yeah, this is a type of, I guess you'd call it, consider it parasitic drag here. So, so here's an example of a tube. Let's say this is the tube going down to our tire or our wheels on the aircraft. As the air hits it, it just creates lots of turbulence. That's why we want to put a fairing in there. It creates less turbulence. Okay, and then here's with a fairing that extends out front. This one has just the fairing in the back of the, let's say that's our wheel right there. This is going to create less turbulence. And again, if you look at this compared to this over here, lots of turbulence on this one, massive amount with just a basic, plate of steel right here. It creates a lot of turbulence there, lots of drag. Anytime you see turbulence, equate it to drag. So here again, we've got a nice fairing on both sides of the tube, and we have very little drag, and that's because we're channeling that air around it. So that's how we defeat, parasitic drag.
The vortex.
Oh yeah, we all looked at that here too. This is a type of fairing. So this is where the wing joins the fuselage on most aircraft. This is a fairing that covers that area there. What they found was if they put a fairing in there and kind of smooth this, made it like an arc right there, they can actually produce less drag there. If it's just a 90-degree angle right here and there's no fairing, this whole thing, this assembly right here is all fairing. It produces a tremendous amount of drag. But when they put that fairing in it, it actually smooths it out, so it cuts down on the amount of disturbed air, let's say, as it hits the wing there. Okay, and this is there's wingtip vortices. One thing I didn't mention about wingtip vortices, they do produce drag. It's in this case you've got this is a crop duster coming through, and that's that swirling. They probably dispense some gas, some smoke here, and then the airplane is flying through that. That's the wingtip vortice. And notice how it curls up like that. It's trying to get to the inside of the wing there. So this aircraft is on the other side of that vortice right there, and you can see that swirl, or that swirl there as it goes through. This is what you see in the movie in Die Hard 2, at the very end of the movie. And there actually, you can probably look up online, Die Hard 2 landing scene or something like that. And again, it's just a great illustration that was totally unintended when they were filming it. So, but yeah, lots of that wingtip vortice is coming swirling like this. It's swirling in because it wants to get to the inside of the top side of the wing there. Okay. Again, same thing here, aircraft, you still have vortices even at higher altitudes. Lower altitudes, because the air is denser, they're going to be more compact. At higher altitudes, you still have, vortices. They spread out a lot faster because the air is less dense. We're mostly concerned with wingtip vortices around airports. That's where you're going to run into the chance of running into a wingtip vortice is very high. And particularly around busy airports like Madison, Milwaukee, Chicago, those all have heavy aircraft coming in to land there. And if you are flying around that airport, you want to be extremely vigilant when you are coming in to land or taking off. You don't want to be right behind it, a large jet that's taking off. You usually typically want to wait 2 to 3 minutes before you take off after that. So again, vortices here. So now this is something interesting. So when you get close to the ground, the vortices actually kind of work to help keep the aircraft in the air a little bit. They give you like an extra boost. So you see these vortices, there's our runway right there, okay? And as the aircraft lands, it's producing these vortices. What happens is it actually kind of creates a cushion of air. This is called ground effect. And we're going to get into this a little bit more. Here's the air molecule, let's say it's going across here. And notice how on the other side, the trailing edge, that molecule, instead of just flying straight off the aircraft, it actually, so as the aircraft, or as it flies through here, when that molecule flies off the aircraft, it points it down. That's called downwash. And we use that again. That's going to be talked about when we get into, the landing, when you actually execute your landing. Or ground effect, that's the other two pieces. So, another diagram for wingtip vorticity, and exciting there. Wingtip vorticity is another diagram for that. Again, I think you guys are starting to see how this works with all these diagrams. So again, there's a low pressure as the aircraft flies through the air. That vorticity the air wants to get up to the top of it because it's moving through the air. It creates a spiral like that. Yeah, so this is a classic FAA diagram. What to avoid, when you're flying behind a large aircraft. So obviously, a larger, let's say a 100,000-pound aircraft needs how much lift to stay in the air? Needs 100,000 pounds, right? So there's 100,000 pounds of air getting displaced that we don't think about in terms of that. 100,000 pounds of air getting displaced behind this aircraft, and that's producing vortices, downwash and things like that. And we want to stay, above maybe or far enough, like 2 minutes behind this aircraft if we're following it. We don't want to fly below the aircraft because what happens is wingtip vortices typically have a tendency to move out from the aircraft. They move, if I'm holding this the aircraft right here, the wingtip vortices have a tendency to trail off like on the sides like this, but they also have a tendency to drop. When the aircraft is on the ground, taking off, as it rotates, once it's in the air, it's producing vortices, right? Once it takes off, those vortices will kind of hug the ground, but they're kind of at the will of the wind. So if the wind is blowing from this side, those wingtip vortices are going to shift over here. So that's something to consider. All right, so yeah, and then the wingtip vortices typically, descend at about, well, sort of 100 feet per minute on there. So if you're below the aircraft, if you're 1,000 feet below and you're a couple minutes behind it, you could be running into wingtip vortices. Okay. Normally you're talking to ATC, but that's not always the case. Maybe you're flying into an uncontrolled airport and there's no ATC in the area. And so the one thing about vortices, I think you'll see a question on the FAA exam, on the ground, they're producing hardly any vortices, those wingtip vortices. It really begins once the aircraft is in the air. That's when the ground is no longer lifting that aircraft up, right? There's not sufficient lift to take it off the ground. But once the aircraft rotates and starts rising, now it's producing lift and it's causing those wingtip vortices, right? So on the ground, when it's on the runway, you're pretty safe. When it comes in and lands, there's still wingtip vortices as it comes in to land, but the minute it touches down, those wingtip vortices pretty much subside. Yeah, and then this is the types of flow. So this would be behind the aircraft. The wingtip vortices flow down and outward from the aircraft if there's no wind. If there's wind, obviously, they're going to flow in the direction of the wind there. Yeah, this is an example of how ground effect, what I was talking about before, how wingtip vortices and that downwash from the wing, how it affects the aircraft as it comes into land. So what you're going to find, and we'll get into this more too, but when you come into land, let's say here's the runway. When you start getting close, usually about a wing's length of the runway right there, you're going to start to feel like the aircraft has got a little bit more lift in it. And that's because of the downwash. It comes down and it's acting like a rocket engine. It's still holding the aircraft up in the air. Then kind of pushes it basically. So ground effect. So normally you think, okay, you just pull down and you level off and the plane just lands. It's not how it works. You get in, if you're going really fast, you actually may coast down the runway quite a ways. If you're on your proper airspeed and you're not producing a lot of lift there, when you come down, you're still going to float a little ways. It doesn't just come down and land like that. Okay, that's called ground effect, and it's caused from the downwash of the wings here. So again, air flows over the top of the wings, and kind of when we fly the aircraft, it flows down. It creates this downwash. This is the better diagram right here. You've got lots of downwash, but when it gets close to the ground, it has no place to go, and it acts kind of almost like a spring to keep the aircraft in the air. That's downwash or ground effect. Okay, everybody understand it? Okay. Let's see. Yeah, this is from Ron Machado. He's got some really good diagrams here, but I think you guys understand this. There's you got your total lift, your effective lift, and then you've got drag. Again, talking about all this stuff. See, this is just in a nice, very well laid out diagram here for that. If you were interested in this, let me know. They actually do have several books on that he has that are great for aviation. So. A few more minutes here. Yep, wing performance and ground effect. Again, you've got lots of lift. It's acting as a wingtip. Basically, what I just told you just now reaches that. And yeah, this talks a little bit about pitch changes. Yeah, so that when you come close to the ground, one of the things that will happen is the aircraft will, if you don't touch the controls, they'll want to pitch forward a little bit. You just need to hold back and maintain your attitude. Keep it up. Keep that nose, if you can, keep it at a higher attitude, that is. And as opposed to letting it land flat like this. We always want to land on the main gear. We don't want to land in the nose gear. And there's several different reasons for that I'll get into later. So. Okay. Okay, we talked about this already. Chord line is always from the leading edge to the very tip of the trailing edge. Regardless of where that flap is, it's going to be basically on that tip of where the flap is. That's the chord line. And yeah, let's see. All right, thrust required in ground effect and outside of ground effect. So you need more thrust when you're outside of ground effect on there to do it. In ground effect, you don't need as much thrust. On here's what that's saying there. And again, this is not the best diagram, but it does kind of illustrate this. I think this is in your book as well.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, yeah. So then you talk about it. It would be worth looking at these diagrams and just kind of study them. But again, thrust required, more thrust up this way, less thrust down here, velocity of the aircraft. If you're moving really fast here, if you're in ground effect, you need less. Obviously, it's saying you need less thrust required. And then angle of attack versus coefficient of lift. The higher the angle of attack, it looks as though when you're out of ground effect, you're going to need a certain portion of lift. If you're in ground effect, you need a higher angle of attack to maintain the landing attitude. All right, let's call it a day. We've covered a ton of stuff today, you guys. Just review this stuff. If you can take the quizzes, that's perfect. And for those of you that have not gone online yet and worked on the portal, start getting online and work on the quizzes. Right. Yep. Yep. Make sure you understand them. Try taking the quizzes without any help if you can. Yep. Perfect. Yeah. And just again, you don't have to get perfect scores. I just want to see you guys using that. And then if you do have questions, you can always email me.
You go past 6? Or?
No, let's stay on. I might add 7 in there as well. I've got to just take a look and see. 7 is aircraft systems. Yeah, we might get into aircraft systems next week. We're good on time right now. We're doing really well. So, yeah, we'll do flight controls, which is a breeze. You guys already know that stuff. It's just review. But we'll go over it, and then aircraft systems. I'll send out an email to everybody tomorrow. Too, with what you guys should be studying this week. Again, review all this stuff. I threw a ton of stuff at you, but you guys are getting this stuff, so good. I think we're starting to go.
So see, you're able to run the like program on your computer.
Yeah.
Is there a way that I can do that? Because I was like sitting at home
Uh-huh.
and